Good evening. You've found your way here, to this quiet frequency that drifts between waking and sleep, a space where voices travel farther than footsteps, and where stories cling like fog on an empty road. Tonight, I have 7 stories for you. Not headlines, not folklore polished for tourists, just shadows gathered from the corners of lives, from phone lines that should never ring, from footprints that should never appear, from rooms, forests, and basements that wait when the lights go out. Stay as long as you like. You don't need to move. All you have to do is listen. And if you feel the air shift around you while you do, well, that's only the night, listening back. Story 1. The Midnight Caller. The world always feels different when the clock slips past 3 in the morning. It is not just that the streets outside fall silent or that the city lights take on a dull, bluish haze. It is the way the air itself seems heavier, as though sound has to push harder to travel. For Ethan, a graduate student living in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, 3 a.m. was a time he usually reserved for restless turning in bed, for the vague guilt of not studying, and for staring at the hairline cracks in the ceiling until sleep finally took pity on him. That night, however, the ceiling offered no mercy. The apartment was a quiet place, but not silent. A thin hum leaked up from the machines below whenever a late customer decided to do laundry at impossible hours. The refrigerator in his kitchen clicked and coughed in unpredictable rhythms, as though trying to clear its throat. The radiator made small metallic sighs whenever the heating pipes exhaled their steam. These were sounds he had lived with for months, background noise that had faded into something like comfort, but then his phone began to ring. The sound didn't fit. It started as a faint vibration against the wooden nightstand, then grew into a sharp, high-pitched insistence. Ethan blinked awake, groggy, his eyes stinging against the harsh blue glow of the screen. He squinted until the numbers came into focus. Not a name, not a familiar string of digits, just 2 words. Unknown caller. He let it ring for a moment, hoping it would stop, but the noise pressed into the stillness like an intrusion. He reached for the device, dragging it close to his ear with a muttered, half-formed, "Hello." At first, nothing. No static. No voice. Only the hollow rush of silence on the line. Ethan waited, listening harder than he wanted to admit, aware of his own breath filling the receiver. He thought about hanging up. Then it came. Click, click, click. 3 small sounds. Clean, deliberate, mechanical. Each one separated by a pause, like someone wanted him to count them. He frowned. The noise was familiar, naggingly so. He knew he had heard it before. He almost spoke again, but something inside urged him to keep listening. The clicking continued. Ethan sat up in bed, the blanket sliding from his shoulders, his bare feet brushing the cool floorboards. He pressed the phone harder to his ear. "Who is this?" His voice sounded fragile, caught between command and plea. The line answered only with another series of clicks, slightly slower this time, each one echoing in his ear like the flick of a tiny switch. He imagined a finger moving with eerie patience, pressing down, releasing, pressing down again. Annoyance finally overcame unease. He hung up and tossed the phone back onto the nightstand. Its glow died instantly, leaving the room to the amber wash of the streetlight outside his window. He rubbed his face, exhaled sharply, and told himself it was a wrong number. Some automated dialer, maybe even a prank. But before he could lie down again, the phone rang once more. He stared at it in the half-dark, the sound drilling into the silence. The same words pulsed across the screen. Unknown caller. His thumb hovered over the decline button, but his hand betrayed him. He answered. Again, the silence. Again, the clicking. But this time, slower, heavier. Click, click, click. Ethan's stomach tightened. Recognition slithered through his mind. The sound wasn't generic at all. It wasn't a machine. It was the sound of a light switch being flicked on and off. He turned his head toward the door where the bedroom switch jutted from the plaster wall. The rhythm matched perfectly. On, off, on, off. His lamp beside the bed burned steady, but his gaze kept pulling toward the darker corners of the room. He forced out a small laugh that cracked halfway through. "Real funny," he muttered, though the only person to hear it was himself. The clicking stopped. Then the line went dead. Ethan set the phone down more carefully this time, his heart beating hard against his ribs. He listened. The refrigerator in the kitchen had gone quiet. The building itself seemed to hold its breath. He told himself to go back to sleep, that the world would look less strange when daylight came. But his body didn't believe it. He sat upright, staring into the dimness. The minutes dragged. His ears strained for any sound, a creak in the hallway, a cough from the neighbor, the familiar churn of laundry below. Nothing. Then, a faint vibration. The phone again. His hand shook slightly as he picked it up, his thumb slick against the glass. The screen showed the same message. No name, no number, just the unknown. He thought of ignoring it. He even set the phone down once, watched it quiver against the wood as though something beneath the surface of the nightstand was trying to escape. But he answered, and heard the same silence, deeper this time. The clicking returned, and with it, a change. The rhythm grew irregular, no longer steady, faster, then slower, as though impatient. Ethan's throat tightened. The switch sound wasn't just familiar, it was identical. Identical to the light in his living room, the one that stuck slightly before snapping into place. He had heard that glitch countless times when turning it on after dark. Now it was in his ear, carrying across a line that should have connected him to nowhere. He whispered, "Where are you?" and instantly regretted giving the silence a question to answer. No voice came, only a final, deliberate click, and then the line cut. Ethan placed the phone face down, not trusting the glow of the screen. He tried to steady his breathing. He told himself again it was a prank, some idiot with a recording, some bored stranger dialing at random. But the thought unraveled when he realized something. He had never given this number to anyone outside his immediate circle. His parents, 2 close friends, his academic advisor, none of them would call at this hour. None of them would remain silent on the line. His skin prickled. The apartment suddenly felt too small. The walls too thin. He stood, walked to the kitchen, poured himself water just to hear the splash of liquid against the glass. The refrigerator chose that moment to click back on, startling him. He cursed under his breath, more angry at his own nerves than at the sound. Still, the question gnawed at him. Why a light switch? Why that sound of all things? He leaned against the counter, staring into the narrow hallway that led back to his bedroom. Even in the weak light from the street, the hallway seemed darker than it should. He remembered the feel of the switch beneath his fingers, the way it resisted for a moment before yielding. He imagined another hand pressing it now, somewhere unseen, as patient as the pauses between clicks on the call. The phone didn't ring again. Not yet, but Ethan couldn't shake the certainty that it would. He returned to bed, though sleep was out of reach. He kept the lamp on, stared at the shadow it cast across the wall, tried to convince himself the shape didn't look like a figure hunched in the corner. Every time his eyelids lowered, he saw the glow of his phone and heard the sound echo again. Click, click, click. Not the sound of someone trying to frighten him. The sound of someone testing, waiting, watching. The lamp by the bed burned without flicker, a weak circle of amber light that seemed less protective with each passing minute. Ethan lay on top of the covers, still fully awake, watching the room as though it might shift when he blinked. The phone rested face down on the nightstand, but its presence felt heavier than its weight. He imagined it vibrating again, the words "unknown caller" flashing across the screen like an unspoken dare. The silence after the last call was worse than the calls themselves. The silence let his imagination wander. He kept replaying the sound in his mind, that exact, mechanical snap of a light switch moving between states. He told himself a stranger couldn't possibly know the texture of his apartment, the quirks of the fixtures, the rhythm of his daily rituals, and yet the sound was perfect, too perfect, as though someone had been inside and recorded it for the sole purpose of playing it back into his ear. Finally, unable to stand it, Ethan pushed himself upright and crossed the room. The boards beneath his feet gave a low, hesitant groan. He paused, waiting to see if the noise would trigger some answering sound. Nothing. The hallway beyond his bedroom stretched narrow and dark. He reached the switch by the door, the one whose stubborn resistance had betrayed him in the call. He pressed it down. The overhead light snapped on with a blinding flood. The sound was identical. He flicked it again. Off. On. Off. The clicks rang sharp in the stillness. His stomach turned as he realized how perfectly it matched the rhythm on the line. The exact hesitation before the snap, the faint metallic catch. He froze with the switch halfway pressed, holding it there, listening for an echo. The apartment answered with silence. Just the same sound, he whispered, trying to tether himself to logic. Phones distort things, make them generic. Could be any switch, but the lie soured in his mouth. He knew better. He stepped into the hallway, the floor cool against his skin. His living room yawned ahead, dimly lit by the jaundiced light that bled through half-closed blinds. He could smell faint detergent drifting from the laundromat below, a clean but chemical scent that always reminded him how thin the walls really were. Tonight, it only heightened his unease. Ethan flipped on the living room light. The fixture buzzed for half a second before glowing. Another click. His heart hammered as he realized how familiar it sounded in his bones. Like an echo of the phone call reaching out into his apartment, he crossed into the kitchen next, checking the back door, rattling the knob. Locked. The bolt stood firm. He tugged at the windows too, each latch stiff but secure. His reflection met him in the glass, pale, tousled hair sticking out, eyes red, rimmed from lack of sleep. He looked like someone rehearsing paranoia. Still, he moved room to room, touching each switch. Each click teased at the memory of the sound in his ear, like a series of fingerprints left behind by an unseen hand. Back in the bedroom, he shut the door and leaned against it. No one's here, he told himself. No one's here. Just me. The radiator sighed in agreement. A metallic exhalation. He nearly laughed at the timing. He lowered himself to the floor, pressing his back against the wood. His eyes kept straying to the phone. He wanted to check if the number had left a record, but he dreaded confirming it. What if there was nothing, no entry, no trace? What if the call had bypassed the rules of his phone altogether? A sound stopped him. Click. He froze. This one hadn't come from the phone. It had come from down the hallway. A single, unmistakable click of a switch. His chest tightened. The living room lamp he'd left on went dark. The apartment shrank instantly, shadows flooding back in with greedy hands. He staggered to his feet, heart racing. The light had gone out on its own, but not with a bulb's death. No fizz, no pop, just the sound of a switch flipped deliberately. He waited. Another click. The kitchen light extinguished too, pulling the far end of the apartment into blackness. Ethan whispered, "No, no, no," without realizing the words had left him. His hands trembled as he reached for the bedroom switch. He flicked it off, then back on, trying to assert control. The overhead bulb glowed obediently, but the satisfaction lasted only seconds. Click. The lamp on his nightstand dimmed into nothing. The apartment now held its breath in near total darkness. He spun in place, scanning corners, doorways, any sign of movement. He could feel the hush of the space pressing in, like walls leaning closer. The faint glow from the street barely outlined the window blinds. His throat tightened. Logic clawed at him. Circuits fail, breakers trip, switches malfunction. But logic did not make the sound. Logic did not flick a switch with that same patient rhythm he had heard on the phone. His phone, the thought jolted him. He fumbled for it on the nightstand. The screen lit instantly under his touch, searing against the dark. The glow steadied his nerves for only a moment before his eyes caught the notification. One missed call. Unknown caller. 3:24 a.m. The time made his skin crawl. The minutes since he had first answered seemed lost, swallowed in an invisible tide. He swallowed hard and dialed his own voicemail. Nothing but the robotic voice, empty of new messages. He tried calling the number back, but the device only flashed an error. No such contact. Then, click. The bathroom down the hall glowed suddenly, light spilling under the doorframe. His breath caught. He had not gone near the bathroom. He had not touched that switch. The glow remained steady for a long moment, then snapped back to darkness. Ethan's knees threatened to give. His mind scrambled for explanation. A faulty wiring job? A neighbor somehow sharing his circuit? But no, the sound was too exact, the timing too deliberate. Someone or something was choosing the switches, one by one, like fingers pressing piano keys in a slow, inevitable tune. He backed toward the closet, half thinking to climb inside. But a worse thought rose. What if that was exactly what the clicks wanted? To herd him into smaller and smaller spaces until there was no escape. A laugh escaped his throat, brittle and cracked. "I'm losing it," he whispered. "It's just the wires. Just the damn wires." But when the next click came, this time from the very hallway outside his bedroom door, His body betrayed him. He staggered back, collided with the bed frame, nearly dropped the phone. His breath stuttered loud enough that he feared it would cover subtler sounds he needed to hear. The door remained closed, but the darkness on the other side of it no longer felt empty. He pressed his palm against the wood, as though to sense vibrations. Nothing but the faint coolness of the material. Yet he knew somewhere beyond. Something moved. Another click. The glow at the bottom of the door wavered as the hallway light flared briefly, then died. The switch was being played with. Slowly, patiently. Click, off, click, on, click, off again. The sound drew closer in his imagination, syncing with his pulse, until he no longer knew if it was in the hall or just behind his ear. Ethan whispered to himself, not to anyone else. If I open the door, nothing will be there. If I don't open it, it will still keep going. His voice sounded foreign, cracked and dry. So what do you do, huh? What do you do? No answer came. Only another click. The door seemed to grow taller the longer Ethan stared at it. A simple slab of painted wood, beige scuffed to gray near the handle, suddenly felt like a barrier between two worlds, one he clung to with his hammering heart, and one where the clicking hand moved freely through the dark. His palm lingered on the cool surface. He could almost hear his pulse echoing inside the wood grain, vibrating up through his fingertips. The silence on the other side was not comfort. It was a waiting silence, one that seemed to lean closer each time he hesitated. Open it, he muttered, voice barely a breath. Just open it. It's nothing. But the trembling in his legs betrayed him. His mind conjured the sound before it happened, click, and then, right on cue, the hallway light snapped alive, spilling a sharp rectangle of yellow under the door. Shadows slashed across his feet. Another click. Darkness again. Something was playing with him. His throat worked against a swallow that refused to finish. The phone in his free hand felt slick, useless, the screen reflecting his wide, bloodshot eyes. He thought about dialing 911, but what would he even say? There's a switch in my apartment. Officer, it's clicking at me. They'd hang up, or worse, they'd come, and find nothing, and his name would be added to some private list of unhinged night callers. No, this was his to face. Ethan gripped the knob, its metal shockingly cold, as if it had been waiting outside in winter air. He drew one sharp breath, then twisted. The door opened with the faintest sigh of hinges. Hallway. Empty. His eyes darted left-right. The carpet was dull, worn thin in the middle. The walls bearing the faint outlines where old frames had hung. The living room yawned at the end, blinds shut, the faintest glow of streetlight leaking through the cracks. Nothing moved. But the air was different. It felt unsettled, disturbed in ways he couldn't see. The faint detergent smell from the laundromat below had thickened, sharper now, as though someone had spilled a box of powder and ground it into the fibers. His ears rang in the stillness, straining for a sound that refused to reveal itself. He stepped forward, bare feet silent against the carpet. Every muscle in his body braced as though the walls might lunge. One step, two, click. He flinched so violently the phone almost leapt from his hand. The glow above him, the hallway fixture, flicked on. The light was flat, oppressive, illuminating every imperfection in the paint, every shadow clinging to corners. Then, before he could breathe, click, darkness again. He spun, half expecting to catch a figure at the switch, but the wall was bare, empty. His breath came too loud, too fast. He tried to quiet it, but each inhale dragged like broken glass. The kitchen door was ajar. Had it been? He couldn't remember. He inched closer, phone raised as if its glow might shield him. The screen reflected faintly off the stainless steel sink. Empty. He pushed the door wider. It groaned, long and low. Inside, the small space looked as it always had. Fridge humming, dishes stacked by the sink, counter cluttered with unopened mail. Yet the shadows stretched too long, bending oddly toward the corners. He felt as though he'd stepped into a photograph of his kitchen, not the real thing, a still life staged for eyes that weren't his. Then click. The bathroom light at the far end flared, spilling a cold white that stabbed his eyes. Ethan's breath stilled in his throat. He couldn't look away. The door was cracked open just enough to let the glow spill out. The light stayed this time, burning steady, waiting. He forced himself forward, One step. Two. His hand brushed the wall for balance. The texture of the plaster felt wrong, gritty, like sandpaper, as though the building had been remade in the dark without precision. Closer. The bathroom mirror would be waiting. He knew, just beyond the edge of the door. He pictured his reflection already standing there, waiting for him, smiling where he was not. He reached the threshold, pressed his hand to the door, slowly pushed. The bathroom yawned open. Light buzzed overhead. The mirror reflected only him, disheveled, pale, haunted. For a fleeting moment, he almost laughed with relief. Almost. Then the phone in his hand vibrated. He nearly dropped it into the sink. The screen glared against the light. Unknown caller. The shrill ring filled the cramped bathroom, bouncing off tile, a sound far too loud for the tiny space. He hesitated. His thumb trembled above the screen. The ringing cut off on its own. He exhaled, chest shuddering until he noticed the glow of the light. It hadn't gone out. The fixture above still burned steady, but the switch by the door had moved. He swore he had left it up. Now it sat firmly down. Someone had flipped it while he watched the mirror. The phone vibrated again. He answered this time. Couldn't stop himself. At first, silence. He braced for the familiar rhythm. It came. Click, click, click. But not in his ear. Behind him. He spun. Phone clutched, white-knuckled, eyes dragging to the hallway he'd just walked through. Darkness stared back. But the sound was there, not imagined. The deliberate flick of a switch. The patient rhythm. The living room light glowed at the far end. Then off. Then on again. Then off. Each click echoed down the hall until it pressed against his chest. Ethan whispered into the phone, as if the unseen caller could hear his thoughts. "Where are you?" And for the first time, there was an answer. A low breath, drawn too close to the receiver, exhaling words in a rasp. "Right here." The voice had not been loud, not even sharp. It had been soft, almost calm, as if someone had leaned against his shoulder and spoken directly into his ear. Yet it carried the weight of something undeniable. Right here. Ethan's body refused to move for a long moment. He stood in the bathroom, the tiles beneath his feet cold and slick with a thin sheen of condensation. The phone glowed weakly in his palm, casting fractured light against the mirror, bending his reflection into something that didn't quite look like him anymore. His chest rose and fell in quick, shallow bursts, the sound of his own breath almost unbearable inside the small room. He tried to force himself to laugh, to release some of the pressure. What came out was a cracked exhale that sounded closer to a sob. He gripped the sink behind him until his knuckles whitened. He wanted to believe this was a prank, a friend with a cruel sense of humor, but his circle was small, his number was private, and no one could have known the intimate cadence of the light switches in his apartment. The silence returned, a silence that didn't feel empty but occupied, as though it were being carefully held by someone unseen. He couldn't stay in the bathroom forever. The walls pressed closer with every second, his reflection leaning toward him in the mirror like it wanted to whisper back. He shook his head violently, turned to the door, and forced himself to grasp the knob. His palm felt slick against the cool metal. The hallway greeted him with a tunnel of black. His phone's glow cut a narrow cone into the void, but instead of comfort, it only seemed to thicken the dark just beyond its reach. He inhaled deeply, whispered a mantra that barely made sense. It's nothing. It's nothing. It's just nerves, and stepped forward. The carpet fibers rasped softly beneath his bare feet. Each step felt louder than it should, like his weight was pressing directly into the spine of the building. Halfway down the corridor, his phone shuddered in his hand. The ringtone burst out, shrill and surgical, slicing through the dark. His heart lurched, almost dropping the device. Unknown caller. With trembling fingers, he answered. No hesitation this time. A voice slid across the line. Low, deliberate. Don't stop walking. Ethan froze. His lungs stilled, ribs locked. His instincts screamed at him to run back into the bathroom, to slam the door and wedge himself into the tub like a child hiding from thunder. But the voice came again, closer, insistent. Don't. Stop. Walking. His legs moved before he made the decision. Step after step, unwilling, as though his body had been commandeered. The switches joined in, punctuating his path. The hallway light above him flicked on with a sharp click, glaring white, then snapped off, plunging him into dark again. The living room lamp answered next, sputtering alive in amber glow, then extinguished just as quickly. The kitchen followed, its fluorescent hum flaring like a beacon before dying in a gasp. Each click drove nails into his chest. He reached the living room, breath shallow, every nerve alight. The blinds hung stiff across the window, but a faint tremor passed through them, as though a breeze had touched them from within the room. He stared, unblinking, waiting for the world to settle. And then he saw it, not in the room, but across the glass. His reflection stood pale and wide-eyed, framed by the glow of his phone. But behind that reflection, in the phantom hallway of glass, another light pulsed. A steady rhythm, on-off, on-off. The hallway lamp glowing where, in reality, there was only darkness. The reflection had betrayed him. He dropped the blind as though burned, heart slamming against his ribs. A mug on the coffee table toppled and shattered, porcelain shards scattering like teeth across the floorboards. The sound was far too loud, a crash that felt like a beacon, announcing him. The phone vibrated again. His hand shook as he raised it. Check the window. Oh, the words oozed. Not command so much as suggestion, like a hand resting against the small of his back. Nudging, he had already obeyed, and the memory of that impossible reflection crawled through his mind like ice water. He turned, shaking his head. No, I'm done. But the air in the room thickened at the refusal. He could feel it, the disapproval of something unseen. The phone rang again. He answered without thought. Turn around. He didn't want to. Every muscle tensed against it, yet slowly, as though someone else's hands were guiding his neck. He obeyed. At the far end of the hallway, the light burned again, and silhouetted within it stood a figure, tall, too tall, its proportions not quite right, head bent as if listening for something inside the walls. His stomach lurched. His breath caught in his throat and refused to move. He wanted to blink but feared losing sight of it. The figure stood still, then click. The hallway fell into darkness. Ethan staggered back, almost tripping over the coffee table. His body acted before his mind, sprinting toward the door. He clawed at the locks, fingers slipping against the chain, the bolt resisting as though swollen with humidity. Panic clawed at him harder. He yanked, cursed under his breath, sweat dripping down his forehead into his eyes. Finally, the chain slid free, clattering against the wood. He twisted the knob. Nothing. The door refused to budge. He slammed his shoulder against it, pain rippling down his arm. Again, harder. The door groaned but did not open. He tried once more, fury and terror combining into a desperate strike, but it was useless. The phone was still in his hand. He hadn't realized it, hadn't chosen to hold it, yet it was pressed to his ear again. You can't leave. The words vibrated in his skull, humming against his teeth. His vision blurred with tears. What do you want from me? The question tore out of him, cracked and high. The silence stretched. So long he thought the line had died. Then one word slipped through, spoken with dreadful patience. Light. Every bulb in the apartment flared at once. The hallway, the kitchen, the living room, even the bathroom he had left behind, all screamed into blinding existence. Heat radiated down in waves, pressing against his skin. He shielded his eyes, stumbling backward, blinded. The fixtures buzzed with furious electricity, brighter and brighter, until he swore the filaments would burst, showering him with shards. And then click, everything died. A silence thicker than the dark itself settled over him. Not even the refrigerator hummed. His ears strained and found only the faint rasp of his own breath, until another sound joined it. Footsteps, slow, heavy, wet against the carpet, though he could see no source. The glow of his phone trembled in his hand, revealing nothing beyond the ragged circle of light. Click. The phone dimmed, its glow shrinking. Click. The glow brightened again, pulsing with the rhythm. The footsteps stopped. His body shook, a trembling that started in his knees and climbed into his chest. He whispered to no one, please stop. But the voice returned, softer than before, curling around the syllables like smoke. You left the bedroom light on. Oh, Ethan's head snapped toward the hall. At its far end, his bedroom door hung ajar, a faint strip of light bleeding across the floor. And he knew with a certainty that hollowed him out that he had turned it off. The thin strip of light beneath the bedroom door was impossibly steady, unbothered by his shaking breaths or the frantic pounding in his ears. Ethan could not move at first. His body had locked itself in place, as though admitting motion would draw the attention of whatever waited beyond that door. The glow was faint, yet in the darkness it cut like a blade, slicing the apartment into two worlds, where he stood and where something else had decided to linger. He wanted to believe he had left the light on without realizing that maybe in his panic he had flicked the switch without remembering. But his mind, clear in its terror, showed him the moment again. His hand pressing the switch down, the bulb dimming into nothing. He had watched the darkness swallow that room. He knew what he had done. The phone pulsed in his hand. A vibration, soft but insistent, like a heartbeat that wasn't his. He raised it to his ear before he realized he had done so. "You should see it," the voice whispered. His throat constricted. "See? What?" A pause. Then, with the same calm certainty, the way your room looks when you're not in it. His knees buckled. He gripped the doorknob of the apartment's front door, nails biting into the metal, though he already knew it would not save him. He considered throwing the phone across the room, smashing it against the wall until it was nothing but shards. Yet he knew, with a cold clarity, that the voice would not die with the device. It would only move closer. The silence pressed in, waiting. And then the light beneath the bedroom door flickered. Once, twice, a pulse, like a wink. Ethan's stomach lurched. He shook his head violently, muttering, "No, no, I'm not going in there." But even as he said it, his feet betrayed him. They inched forward, dragging him toward the hall. The phone remained at his ear, an open line to something that refused to let him stop. The hallway stretched longer than it had ever seemed, a tunnel of darkness that narrowed around him. The strip of light ahead grew brighter, more distinct, spilling across the carpet like a tongue of fire. Each step sounded too loud, his breaths too sharp. He thought of neighbors sleeping peacefully in their apartments, unaware of the nightmare blooming just above them. At last he reached the door. His hand hovered above the knob. The metal shimmered faintly in the light. His palm felt slick with sweat, his fingers trembling. He could not remember the last time he had blinked. The voice sighed across the line. "Go on." Ethan twisted the knob and pushed. The bedroom lay exactly as he had left it almost. The lamp on the nightstand glowed warmly, casting amber light across the bed. His blanket was tangled where he had thrown it back, the imprint of his body still denting the mattress. The closet door stood slightly ajar, a thin line of black between its frame, but it wasn't those details that hollowed him out. It was the switch, still in the off position. His eyes darted from the lamp to the wall, disbelief turning his legs weak. The switch had not been touched, and yet the light burned. The phone crackled. He raised it with trembling hands, afraid to listen but unable not to. "It likes to watch you leave." Ethan's breath stuttered out of him. His gaze dragged, against his will, to the closet. The narrow black line seemed wider now, darker than shadow should be. His imagination filled the space with long fingers curled around the inside of the door, with eyes glinting in the gap. He wanted to slam it shut, to seal it forever, but he couldn't move. Another click, not from the wall, not from his phone, from the closet. The lamp dimmed, then flared again, pulsing with the rhythm. Each glow revealed more of the room, each shadow twisted and elongated, bending toward him. He staggered backward into the hallway, his shoulders striking the wall. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor, yet even without it pressed to his ear, the voice still came. Not from the device, not from any single point, from everywhere at once, carried on the thickened air of the apartment. "Do you see it now?" His throat locked. Tears blurred his vision, but through them he thought he saw movement slow, deliberate within the sliver of closet darkness. The kind of movement that wasn't quite human, as though joints bent the wrong way. He bolted, past the kitchen, past the living room, toward the front door. He clawed at the knob again, screamed as the metal burned cold beneath his touch. The door did not yield. He pounded his fists against it, his cries breaking through the silence of the building. For a moment he thought he heard footsteps above, perhaps a neighbor stirred, but the sound faded quickly, swallowed by the thicker noise behind him. Click. The living room lamp snapped alive. Click. The hallway burned bright again. Click. The kitchen flared, fluorescent hum vibrating his teeth. Every light in the apartment ignited at once, flooding the space in searing brightness. Shadows dissolved. replaced by a clarity so sharp it hurt to see. For a fleeting heartbeat, Ethan felt a rush of relief. At least the dark was gone. At least he could see. Then he realized what the light revealed. Every bulb, every lamp, every fixture had turned not toward the ceiling, but toward him. He stood in the center of the apartment, bathed in 100 glares of artificial light, all pointed like eyes. The walls themselves seemed to lean closer, each shadowless surface watching, scrutinizing, and within that brightness he was no longer alone. Shapes gathered in the corners, not cast by objects but by absence. They swayed faintly, tall and narrow, flickering as the bulbs hummed, their heads bent at unnatural angles, listening, waiting. His scream tore out of him, ragged and raw. He stumbled backward, covering his face. But even through his closed lids, he could feel the sear of the light pressing against him, burning the shape of his fear into memory. Then, as suddenly as it had come, it ended. Click. Darkness swallowed everything. The silence that followed was absolute. His ears rang with it. He dared not move, dared not breathe. His body trembled so violently he thought his bones might crack beneath the strain. And then the phone, still lying somewhere on the floor, lit once more. The glow was faint, distant, but enough to show him the shape of the apartment around him. The screen bore a single message: bedroom light on. His lips parted, but no sound came. The glow died, and in the blackness, another voice, not from the phone, not even whispered, brushed directly against his ear. You should never have answered. The apartment never stirred again. The neighbors, when questioned later, said they hadn't heard a thing. Only one odd detail was mentioned. The next morning, every light in Ethan's unit was found switched on, burning brightly into the daylight, though the apartment itself was empty. Story 2. The mud trail. Rain had a way of changing the air inside Amelia's house. It didn't matter that she kept the windows latched tight or that the doors swelled shut when humidity crept into the wood. The rain always found a way to slip in. It lived in the scent that clung to the old pine floorboards, in the damp breath that crawled along the plaster walls, in the coolness that gathered in the corners no lamp could reach. That night, the storm had lasted hours. Sheets of water poured through the forest around her cabin, a steady drumroll against the roof. Wind carried the smell of wet leaves and stirred the gutters into a restless trickle. Amelia had fallen asleep on the couch, lulled by the constant percussion. When she woke near dawn, the light seeping through the curtains was weak and gray, the kind that bleached color from everything it touched. She rubbed her eyes, stretched stiff limbs, and listened. The storm had quieted but not stopped. Rain still pattered, softer now, as though the world outside had grown tired. She rose, padded into the kitchen, and froze. The floor wasn't clean anymore. A thin trail of brown streaked across the boards, snaking from the back door to the center of the room. The mud had dried into a cracked ribbon, flakes lifting at the edges. At first glance, it looked almost accidental, something tracked in on the soles of boots. Except Amelia hadn't worn boots in weeks, and the prints, faint as they were, didn't resemble hers at all. Her heart pressed upward, lodged against her throat. She crouched, fingertips hovering just above the trail. The dirt was brittle, breaking easily when she pinched a fragment between her nails. She turned toward the back door, noting the way the streak began directly beneath the knob, as though someone had pushed inside without wiping their feet. But she had locked it. She always locked it. The storm last night had rattled the door until it shuddered, and she had tested it twice before retreating to the couch. The bolt had been stiff, wedged tight in the frame, and yet the mud was there. Amelia stood quickly, crossing the room. She tried the handle. The lock still sat firmly in place. She rattled it hard enough that the wood creaked, but the bolt did not budge. She lingered by the door, her breath fogging the glass pane set into the frame. Beyond it, the yard was nothing but churned soil, puddles reflecting the pale sky. No footprints remained outside, washed away in the night. The trail began here, inside, and led only inward. Her stomach tightened. She followed it. The ribbon wound across the kitchen toward the hallway. It wasn't bold or heavy, but faint, like something dragging just enough to mark the floor. She moved slowly, every creak of the boards beneath her feet making her wince. The trail stopped abruptly in the center of the room, a jagged smear that ended without explanation. No prints leading away, no path continuing up the stairs. Just gone. Amelia stood there for a long time, the house listening with her. A drop of water slipped from her hair onto the wood, darkening a spot beside the trail, and she startled as if something had moved. Finally, she fetched a rag and a bucket, scrubbing until the boards looked clean. She worked quickly, furiously, as though removing the stain could erase the unease. By the time she finished, the rain outside had eased to a mist. Sunlight threatened to break the clouds but hadn't quite succeeded. Amelia checked every lock in the house. The back door, the front door, even the small hatch in the cellar, all secure. She told herself it must have been her, that she had tracked the mud last evening without realizing. Though the lie tasted bitter, she had been careful, always careful. That night, she tried to sleep in her bed. The storm returned with heavier hands, pounding the roof, rattling the shutters. The wind pushed through the chimney with a low moan, a sound that mimicked voices just enough to keep her eyes open. She lay listening, ears straining for more than the storm. Every creak of the old wood made her heart lurch. She rose twice to check the locks. Still sealed. She whispered to herself, a mantra in the dark. You are alone. You are safe. You are imagining things. By morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight filtered pale gold through the blinds. For a few minutes, the house felt normal again. She padded into the kitchen, craving coffee, desperate for something ordinary, and froze once more. The mud had returned. This time it was darker, wetter, stretching farther across the boards. A jagged line began again at the back door and led all the way to the bottom of the stairs. Droplets had dried into faint speckles beside the trail, as though whoever or whatever had left it had paused midway, dripping water onto the floor. Her breath hitched. She tightened her robe around herself and forced her eyes up the staircase. The second floor remained shadowed, silent, the kind of silence that seemed to wait for her to disturb it. She shook her head violently, refusing to follow. She dropped to her knees instead, scrubbing again, her hands shaking so badly that water sloshed from the bucket onto her clothes. She worked until her arms ached, until the trail vanished beneath soap and effort, but the boards seemed darker where the mud had been, as though the house itself had absorbed the stain. Amelia sat back against the wall, exhausted, her breath harsh. She pressed her palms to her face and willed herself not to cry. She would not. She refused. Afterward, she bought a set of cameras from the small hardware store in town. Cheap, but serviceable. She positioned one facing the back door, another toward the hallway. She watched their tiny indicator lights blink red as they recorded, and she told herself she would have proof now, proof that she was not imagining. Proof that someone, somehow, was getting inside. That night she sat on the couch, unable to bring herself to lie in bed. The rain had eased into a whisper, but the silence between drops was heavier than thunder. She kept the remote in her lap, the television murmuring static-filled reruns just for company. Her eyes closed sometime after midnight. When she woke, the house was gray again with morning light. The coffee table clock read 6:07. She stretched stiffly, rubbed her eyes, and turned her head toward the kitchen. A line of mud snaked across the floor, thicker than before, leading not only to the stairs but curling directly toward the closed door of the storage room she almost never used. Her heart stopped. The bucket and rag she had left in the corner still sat untouched. She hadn't moved them, but the trail had. Amelia stood frozen at the edge of the kitchen, her eyes fixed on the streak of brown curling toward the storage room door. The room itself was unremarkable, barely large enough for boxes of winter clothes, a rusting set of tools, and the remnants of furniture she had never bothered to throw away. She hadn't opened it in months. Sometimes she almost forgot it existed. Now, with the morning light bleaching the floorboards and highlighting every jagged mark of mud, the door seemed different. Taller, heavier, a presence instead of a door. Her first instinct was to retreat, pretend she hadn't seen it, clean as she always did, erase the evidence until the wood gleamed again. But the memory of the trail returning again and again made her hesitate. Erasing did nothing. The mud came back anyway, darker each time, as though whatever left it was growing bolder. She turned instead to the cameras. The small monitor she had bought sat on the kitchen counter, a square of cheap plastic with a screen barely larger than her hand. She pressed the button to cycle through the night's recordings, the red light flickering as the footage loaded. The first angle, facing the back door, showed the storm in full force. Wind whipped trees against the siding, Rain hammered down in streaks across the glass pane. The door itself never moved. Not once. The bolt gleamed faintly in place the whole night. She switched to the second feed, the one watching the hallway. The grainy image revealed little, the faint outline of the rug, the dim lamp glow she had left on for comfort. Hours passed in gray blur. Then, sometime around 3 a.m., the screen rippled. A shadow appeared, not walking, not striding in from the door. It simply grew from the edge of the frame, as though the darkness itself had thickened. The lamp near the hallway flickered, dimmed, then brightened again. For a full minute the shadow lingered, unmoving, a vertical stain against the grainy light. Then, just as suddenly, it contracted, vanished. Amelia stared, breath shallow. She rewound, watched again. The mud trail hadn't been visible in the dimness, but she knew that it had been forming just out of sight. Her throat tightened. She pressed the screen off and turned back toward the storage room. The trail glistened faintly where the mud had not yet dried, dark against the pale wood. It ran straight, without hesitation, to the thin crack at the bottom of the door, as if whatever left it had slipped inside. She wiped her palms on her robe, though they were already dry. She approached slowly, every creak of the floor beneath her feet making her wince. The closer she came, the colder the air felt, the dampness clinging heavier against her skin. She pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing. No rustle of boxes. No scrape of movement. Only the hush of her own blood in her ears. Her hand hovered over the knob. She knew she should call someone. The sheriff in town. A neighbor. Anyone. But what would she say? That mud had walked across her house and hidden itself in a storage closet. That shadows had thickened on her cheap camera feed. She turned the knob. It resisted at first, stiff from disuse. Then it gave with a groan, and the door creaked inward. The room was dark. The small window high on the wall was clouded with grime, letting in only a smear of gray light. Dust floated in lazy spirals, stirred by the movement of the door. Boxes leaned against one another in precarious stacks. A broken chair sagged in the corner. Amelia scanned quickly, phone raised to add its glow. Her stomach clenched. The trail ended here. It cut across the floorboards, curved around a stack of boxes, and vanished into the middle of the room. No footprints leading out. No sign of anyone. She stepped inside, the floor groaning under her weight. The smell was stronger here, earthy, damp, as though the storm outside had seeped through the walls. She crouched, tracing the line with her eyes. It grew thinner as it reached the center, then stopped abruptly. She touched the wood where it ended. Her fingertips came away damp. Her breath hitched. She wiped her hand against her robe and stumbled back, nearly knocking over a stack of boxes. Her eyes darted everywhere, the corners, the ceiling, the doorframe, as though expecting something to lunge. But the room held still, silent. Amelia backed out quickly, pulling the door shut. She twisted the lock, though it had never seemed necessary before, and pressed her back against the wood. Her pulse throbbed in her throat, each beat hammering a warning she didn't need. The house listened with her. The silence pressed against her ears until she whispered aloud, just to hear something human. "I'll figure this out. I'll figure this out." But her words felt thin, already absorbed by the walls. That evening, she refused to leave the couch. She set the cameras to record again, double-checked the locks 3 times. The storm outside had finally broken, leaving the forest drenched but still. The quiet was worse than the rain. She left the television murmuring faint static. She tried to read, though the words blurred. Her eyes kept flicking to the hallway, to the faint outline of the storage room door. It seemed darker now, even in the lamplight, a slab of shadow among pale walls. Sleep found her in fits. At some point in the early hours, a sound woke her. Not thunder, not wind. A soft, deliberate scrape. She sat upright, heart pounding. The television screen glowed blue in the corner, no longer carrying a picture. The room smelled faintly of wet earth. The scrape came again, a low drag, like something heavy shifting against wood. Her eyes darted to the hallway. The storage room door was still shut, but the sound, it came from behind it. She forced herself to stay still, to listen. For a long moment there was only silence. Then a faint knock. Once, twice, 3 times. Slow, measured. Her body trembled, every instinct screaming to run, but there was nowhere to go. Outside was forest, wet and endless. Inside, the house now held something she couldn't name. The knock faded, silence returned, but when dawn arrived and pale light bled through the curtains, Amelia rose with leaden limbs to find the trail again. This time it led not only from the back door, but out of the storage room as well. The house no longer felt like hers. It had been a shelter once, a cabin meant to hold warmth against the long rains of autumn, to keep the forest at bay and frame the silence in a way that was comforting rather than suffocating. But now, every board seemed to have shifted allegiance. The walls carried a dampness that did not belong. The ceilings leaned lower than before, and the very air pressed against her lungs as if the house had begun breathing with something other than her. Amelia had thought the cameras would protect her, or at least provide clarity. Instead, they had become witnesses that only deepened her dread. That morning, with her stomach hollow and her hands trembling around a mug of untouched coffee, she loaded the night's recording. The first minutes were uneventful. Static shadows, the occasional flicker of the lamp, the stretch of hallway laid bare by grainy pixels. Then, as the storm softened outside, movement stirred on the screen. The storage room door, which she had locked with her own hand, eased open without a sound. Her breath hitched. She leaned closer, afraid to blink, her skin prickling as the shadow inside the doorway thickened. The mud trail appeared gradually, as though painted stroke by stroke across the floorboards, darker and more deliberate than before. Yet no shape crossed the threshold. No body, no feet. Only the trail itself, dragging outward from the dark mouth of the room, winding down the hall as though guided by an invisible hand. She pressed pause, stared at the frozen image, and felt the hollow certainty bloom. The house was not being broken into. It was exhaling something it had hidden. She turned the monitor off and sat in silence, the clock ticking too loudly on the wall. She told herself to move, to clean again, to erase the evidence before it claimed more space, but her limbs resisted. She remained in the chair for hours, watching the light shift across the floorboards, her mind spiraling through half-formed thoughts that never ended. When evening fell, she could not bring herself to enter the hallway. She stayed in the kitchen, preparing a meal she never ate, moving through the motions only to feel less like prey. The storage room door loomed in her peripheral vision, closed now, yet heavier in its stillness, as though aware of being watched. By midnight, fatigue forced her to the couch. She left the lamp on, the cameras recording, the bucket and rag ready at her feet. She whispered to herself as she lay down, words without meaning, little chance of reassurance that evaporated before they reached her ears. Sleep came like a trick of the body rather than a choice, and with it came the dream. She found herself standing at the foot of the stairs, the boards wet beneath her feet. The house around her was silent except for the steady drip of water, though no storm raged outside. A thin path of mud stretched upward, curling into the shadows above. She climbed, one step after another, her legs heavy, as though the wood had softened into earth beneath her. At the top, she found doors yawning open, each one revealing nothing but a smear of dark forest, rain falling endlessly beyond. She turned, desperate to go back, but the stairs had vanished, replaced by a slope of soil that led straight into the storage room below. She woke gasping, her chest soaked with sweat, the taste of mud sharp in her throat. The lamp still glowed on the table. The television hummed faint static. For a moment she thought relief might come, that it had only been a nightmare, until her eyes adjusted to the pale blue glow of morning. The trail had returned. This time it stretched farther than ever before. It began at the storage room, curling across the kitchen, looping into the living room, circling the couch where she lay. Her breath caught as she realized the mud had been inches from her while she slept. The air smelled damp, heavy with the metallic tang of wet soil, and she clutched the blanket tighter around her body as if it could shield her. Her hands shook as she reached for the monitor. The new footage loaded, and what she saw drained the last of her strength. The trail had not simply appeared this time. The camera caught movement subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable when her eyes adjusted. The shadows lengthened, pulled across the boards as though the house had tilted, and from the thin crack beneath the storage door, something seeped. It was darker than shadow, thicker, as though liquid earth had oozed outward in a line that hardened into prints. No feet had left. It curved across the hall, into the living room, and paused. The camera flickered once, as if resisting, then steadied again. And there, faint but undeniable, was the outline of a figure standing at the edge of the couch. Not detailed, not even fully shaped, only a blur taller than the frame allowed, leaning toward the place where her sleeping form lay. The figure bent, as though examining, before fading back into the air itself. Amelia pressed the screen off and pushed the monitor away, bile rising in her throat. She wanted to run, to pack a bag, lock the door, and drive until the cabin was a memory. But another thought stopped her. What if it followed? What if it was not the house at all, but something that had found her? Something that would lay its trails across every floor she ever touched. She stood, pacing, her feet tracing circles as frantic as her thoughts. The mud trail still glistened faintly in the living room, each streak a reminder that scrubbing meant nothing. The house had begun speaking, and each night its voice grew clearer. By late afternoon, clouds gathered again. Rain tapped the roof in hesitant bursts, building toward another storm. Amelia felt the weight of it pressing down, as if the weather itself colluded with whatever lived beneath her floor. She lit every lamp she owned, the glow weak against the thickening gray. As night closed in, she set the cameras once more, though she already knew what they would show. She sat on the couch with the bucket and rag beside her, her eyes locked on the hallway door. The rain fell harder, steady and endless, drumming against the windows until she could no longer tell whether the sound came from outside or from within. The hours dragged. Midnight arrived. 1 o'clock. 2. Her eyes burned, her muscles taut, exhaustion clawing at her but never quite pulling her under. Then, at 3 a.m., a sound stirred. Not the knock from before, not the scrape. A slow, deliberate creak, as though weight shifted inside the storage room, pressing against the boards. Amelia sat rigid, blanket clutched in her lap, the rag slipping unnoticed to the floor. Her breath slowed until she hardly dared inhale. The creak came again, louder this time. She stared at the door, the knob gleaming faintly in the lamplight, and realized the truth. The lock no longer mattered. The house had already chosen to let something through. The storm had returned with heavier hands, hammering the roof until the whole house seemed to pulse with it. Amelia sat on the couch, her arms wrapped around herself, eyes locked on the hallway where the storage room door waited in silence. The cameras blinked their small red lights, recording faithfully, but she no longer trusted them to tell her what she needed to know. They showed only fragments, distortions, shadows made visible in ways that her own eyes never could, and sometimes she wondered which was worse, to see the truth blurred, or to feel it raw and immediate, pressing against her skin. The creaking from behind the door had stopped hours ago, but the silence it left behind was worse, like a stage cleared for an actor who had not yet appeared. She told herself she would not move, that she would stay on the couch until morning, that daylight would peel back the unease clinging to the walls. But the thought curdled even as it formed, because daylight had never saved her before. Each morning had only revealed new trails, new evidence that the house was no longer hers alone. So she rose. Her legs were heavy, reluctant, each step through the living room as if the boards themselves wished to hold her back. The bucket and rag she had kept close slid to the side, forgotten. Her bare feet touched the hallway rug, damp at the edges where the mud had dried into permanent stains, and she shivered though the air was not cold. The door to the storage room loomed ahead, darker than the others, its frame swollen from years of rain-soaked air. She reached out and let her fingers brush the wood. It felt damp, as though the storm outside had seeped through, but colder, almost clammy, like skin left too long in water. She turned the knob, locked, her breath stilled. She remembered locking it herself after she had seen the trail end there. Yet the sound she had heard earlier, the creaks and shifting weight, had not cared about locks. The trail itself had not cared. The barrier meant nothing. She leaned her forehead against the wood, whispering, "What do you want?" The storm answered with a roll of thunder, rattling the window panes. The knob beneath her palm twitched. Amelia stumbled back, eyes wide. For a heartbeat, she thought she had imagined it, but then it turned again, slowly, deliberately, a fraction of an inch before stopping. The air in the hallway thickened, pressing at her chest. She fled back to the kitchen, snatched the monitor from the counter, and fumbled with the controls. The hallway camera showed her own figure standing frozen outside the storage room, the image grainy and gray. She watched herself retreat, clutching the monitor. But something else shifted in the frame. Behind her, in the narrow band of shadow at the bottom of the door, a line of black seeped outward. It was not mud this time. It was darker, wetter, as though the ground itself were leaking into the house. It stretched slowly across the floor, branching like veins. Her real eyes darted to the hallway, to the space beneath the door. The shadows there were still. She looked back at the screen. The dark veins had lengthened, curling into shapes that hinted at fingers pressing outward. She dropped the monitor. It hit the floor with a crack, static flashing across the screen before it died. The hallway lights flickered, then steadied again. Amelia's heart hammered. She could not decide if it was safer to stay in the kitchen or to confront the thing that kept inching closer with every night. She thought of the trails circling the couch, of the outline leaning over her sleeping body, and bile rose in her throat. Hiding was no longer possible. She took a flashlight from the drawer, its beam narrow but strong. She gripped it with both hands as though it were a weapon, and stepped back into the hall. The rug was damp under her feet, carrying a faint smell of soil. The storage room door waited, unmoving. She pressed the flashlight beam across the floor. No dark veins, no mud, just the ordinary dust of an old house. Her breath slowed, though not much. She turned the knob again. This time it gave. The door creaked open, and the beam of the flashlight cut into the dark. Boxes slumped in corners, draped with cobwebs. The broken chair sagged, its cushion torn open to reveal stuffing. The air smelled dense, like earth and mildew. But the trail was there, faint but undeniable, curling across the floor and vanishing into the center of the room. Amelia stepped inside. The boards groaned beneath her weight. She swept the flashlight left and right, the cone of light trembling. For a moment, nothing seemed out of place. Then the beam landed on the far wall. The plaster there had split. A jagged crack ran from floor to ceiling, wide enough to reveal darkness behind it, deeper than any ordinary gap. Mud streaked the edges, glistening as though freshly laid. She swallowed hard, throat dry. She wanted to believe it was just damage, the house settling, the storm's work. But as she watched, the crack pulsed, a faint shudder as though something on the other side had shifted. Her flashlight dimmed. She shook it frantically, the beam sputtering before steadying again. When the light flared back, the crack looked wider. She stepped back, chest heaving. The smell of soil grew stronger, metallic, clinging to her tongue. Her mind screamed to run, but her feet rooted to the spot. Then a sound rose, not from the crack, not from the room, but from the phone she had left on the counter in the kitchen. She heard it clearly, the faint vibration against wood, followed by the ring. The sound echoed down the hall, winding through the house until it filled the storage room. Her flashlight dimmed again, flickered, and she knew with sudden, cold certainty that the phone would show the same words it always had. Unknown caller. Her hands trembled. The beam shook across the crack, catching the faintest suggestion of movement behind it, the whisper of something shifting in the dark. Then the knob behind her rattled. The door she had entered through shivered against its frame, the sound sharp in the silence. She turned, flashlight sweeping. The hallway beyond was pitch black, though she had left the lamps burning. The door slammed shut. The flashlight died. The darkness inside the storage room was total, pressing against her skin, filling her lungs, swallowing her whole. And in that darkness, faint but undeniable, came the sound she had come to dread. Squash, drag, squash, drag. The sound of mud being carried across the floor, circling closer. The dark pressed so tightly against Amelia's eyes that she began to doubt she had ever known what vision was. The storage room had collapsed into a void, sound swelling in place of sight, each faint drag across the floorboards echoing louder than thunder. She clutched the dead flashlight to her chest, its plastic body slick with her sweat, her breath breaking in shallow bursts. Squash, drag, squash, drag. The rhythm circled her, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, never steady. She turned with it, but the sound moved faster than she could. She felt dizzy, as though the house itself were spinning, pulling her into its axis. The air thickened, damp, metallic, as though she were breathing through mud. "Stop," she whispered. The word cracked in the silence, fragile and useless. The dragging halted. For a heartbeat, she felt relief. Then slowly, a new sound seeped into the room. A faint pattering, irregular at first, then steady. It took her a moment to recognize it. Droplets of water falling onto wood. She reached her free hand down and felt the floorboards. Wet. The storm outside could not have seeped this deeply, not in minutes. The wetness spread beneath her palm, cold and sticky. She pulled her hand up and, though she could not see, she knew it was stained dark with mud. The phone rang. Its muffled vibration came from the kitchen, distant yet impossibly close, as if the walls carried it into the marrow of her bones. The sound grew sharper, insistent, until it seemed to echo from the very crack in the wall. Amelia's knees weakened. She staggered backward, colliding with a stack of boxes. They toppled with a crash, cardboard splitting, contents spilling across the floor. In the chaos, a faint glow blinked in the debris red, pulsing. One of her cameras knocked free. She grabbed it like a lifeline, angling the lens toward the center of the room. The tiny monitor flickered alive, grainy gray blooming across the screen. At first, it showed only static, dust, the curve of fallen furniture. Then, slowly, something darker resolved. The mud trail was there, curling in fresh streaks, circling her position. The camera picked up what her eyes could not, a shadow moving along it. Not a body, not a person, something shapeless, taller than the ceiling allowed, dripping onto the boards with each step. Her breath stilled. She lowered the monitor, desperate to see it with her own eyes, but the room remained pitch black. Only the camera revealed it. Only the machine acknowledged the thing walking with her. The monitor hissed, flickered, and in that flicker she caught her own image huddled, terrified while the shadow loomed directly above her. She screamed. The flashlight in her grip flared to life, brilliant and blinding. She whipped it around, beam cutting through the room. Boxes, chair, wall, nothing else. No figure, no trail, but the crack yawned wider, gaping as though the wall itself had split into a mouth. Mud pulsed from it, spilling in slow rivulets, crawling across the boards. The sound of dragging grew louder, synced with the seep of earth. Amelia stumbled toward the door, shoulders slamming against it, fingers clawing at the knob. It resisted, swollen shut. She twisted harder, nails tearing, the metal slick with her blood and sweat. Behind her, the mud spread, filling the room with its smell, sharp and sour, like rot beneath wet leaves. She gagged, coughed, pressed herself harder into the wood. The phone rang again. This time the sound came from her pocket. Her eyes widened. She hadn't brought it with her. She had left it on the counter, yet now it vibrated against her thigh, insistent, impossible. With trembling hands, she pulled it free. Unknown caller. She almost dropped it, but her thumb brushed the screen. She answered. At first, silence. Then, the faint squelch of mud, amplified, filling her ear. She pressed the phone away, but the sound continued, as if the device had become nothing more than a hollow channel. Then the voice. You've been cleaning. Her stomach turned to ice. Her voice cracked, broke. I didn't want it here. A low chuckle, wet and rasping. But it wants you here. The floor shifted beneath her, sagging as though softened into soil. She staggered, dropped the flashlight, the beam spinning wildly before dying again. The camera still glowed faintly in the corner, showing her own trembling body surrounded by a widening ring of black mud. She pounded the door again, sobbing. Let me out. Ender. The voice breathed close, almost gentle. You're already in. The door gave way suddenly, swinging outward. She tumbled into the hallway, gasping, crawling across the boards. For a moment she felt saved. The hallway lamps glowed faintly, their light weak but steady, and the storm outside had softened to a drizzle. But when she looked back, the storage room door was wide open, and the trail had followed her. Thick, wet streaks stretched across the hallway now, leading not just out of the storage room but along the walls, curling like vines, spreading into every corner. She staggered to her feet, backing toward the front door, fumbling at the locks. The bolt slid free easily this time. The knob turned without resistance. She yanked the door open. Beyond was not her yard, not the wet grass, not the trees heavy with rain. Only a black slope of soil, stretching endless beneath a sky the color of ash. She stumbled back, slamming the door shut. The mud trail now covered the floorboards at her feet, glistening, thick, alive. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't want to look, but her hand moved on its own. The screen lit her pale face and the words she dreaded. New entry recorded. A small camera icon blinked. She opened it. The footage showed her house, her couch, her kitchen. But the angles were wrong. Higher, sharper, as though filmed from the ceiling corners. Cameras she had never bought. The trail spread in the footage too, reaching every room. And in the final frame, the camera turned toward the storage room. The door was open, and something tall and faceless was stepping through. She dropped the phone and clattered against the mud-slick floor. The lamps flickered, once, twice, then died. The last thing she felt was the damp rising through the boards, seeping into her skin, pulling her downward into the soil the house had always hidden. By the time neighbors came days later, rain had washed the yard clean. The cabin's doors were locked, the windows sealed. Inside, the furniture sat untouched, the cameras blinking red with full memory cards. Only one thing was out of place, a long smear of mud curling across the kitchen floor, stopping before the couch where no one Saturday. Story 3. The tape confession. Daniel had always liked the smell of old machines. Not everyone could tolerate it, the tang of rust, the sour sting of oxidized wiring, the faint mildew that clung to speakers that had sat too long in attics, but for him it was comforting, like the scent of old books or cedar smoke. He ran a small repair shop out of his garage, a place cluttered with turntables and shortwave radios, cassette decks stacked like forgotten relics of another century. Friends teased him that no one under 50 cared anymore, that the future belonged to glass screens and touch commands. Daniel didn't argue. He liked the weight of buttons, the resistance of dials, the hum of circuits when they finally agreed to work again. On that gray afternoon, with the rain tapping lightly against the garage door and the fluorescent light buzzing above, he had been working through a box of yard sale finds when he uncovered it. A tape recorder. Portable, square, scratched at the corners but intact. A model from the late 70s, its plastic yellowed with time, the play button sticking halfway down. Dust clung to the grill where the microphone Saturday. He turned it over, found a cassette still inside, its label worn to a blur. He smiled faintly. People rarely sold machines with their tapes still lodged inside. More often the decks were empty, the media lost years before. But this one had been left behind, sealed inside a box among broken radios and cracked speakers, like a secret someone had meant to discard. Daniel set it on the workbench, plugged the frayed cord into the wall, and pressed power. The machine groaned, the reels inside, twitching once before falling still. He dismantled the case, his fingers moving with the patience of habit, cleaning contacts, brushing away dust, replacing a stretched belt with one scavenged from his drawer of parts. The whole time the rain drummed its steady rhythm, and the garage filled with the scent of warmed dust and metal. After an hour, he reassembled the case, tightened the screws, and pressed play. The recorder clicked alive. At first, only static, a hiss like the rush of distant wind. He adjusted the volume, leaning closer, one hand steadying the machine as though it might run away. The static thickened, then thinned, and from within it a voice emerged. Male, low, calm. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I've done. Daniel blinked, sat back slightly, then leaned in again. The voice carried the flat tone of someone reading from a script, but beneath it trembled something else. Exhaustion, or perhaps guilt. I've been watching her for months now. At first it was by accident. I noticed the way she left her blinds cracked at night, the way the glow of her lamp painted her walls. I told myself it was harmless. Everyone looks, sometimes. But it didn't stay harmless. I started timing my walks to pass her window. I learned her habits, what time she came home, when she cooked, when she slept. Daniel's stomach tightened. He glanced at the cassette, at the faint rotation of the reels, as if he could stop them by will alone. He considered pressing pause, but his hand hovered and did not fall. She keeps a diary on her nightstand. I know because I saw her writing in it, every night before bed. I could almost read the words when she angled the lamp. I wanted to know what she wrote, what she thought about. I wanted to know if she knew about me. The voice cracked faintly on that last word, then steadied. I followed her once, only once, from her work to the corner market, from the market back to her apartment. I memorized the way she carried her bag, the way she touched her keys 3 times before unlocking the door. I knew then that she was the one, the only one. And Daniel reached forward and hit pause. The silence that followed rang louder than the confession. He rubbed his forehead, unsettled. It had to be a prank. Someone had recorded this for drama, or for art. Maybe an abandoned college project, some strange experiment in storytelling. People made things like that all the time. And yet, the voice had sounded too earnest, too plain. No music, no production, no flair. Just a man confessing into a machine, as though the plastic box was his only witness. Daniel left the garage, walked into the kitchen, poured water, and tried to shake it off. But the silence of the house pressed heavy against him, thicker than before. He returned, sat again at the bench, and told himself he would listen a little longer, just to hear where it went. He pressed play. I know her apartment as well as my own, the voice continued. I know the way her bathroom door doesn't quite shut, the way the faucet drips if she doesn't turn it all the way. I know the picture she keeps above her bed, a framed sketch of a tree, thin and pale. I know the loose floorboard near her kitchen that creaks when she steps on it. She doesn't notice it anymore, but I do. I notice everything. Daniel swallowed hard. His mind flicked through the apartments he had visited in his life, the kitchens he had stood in, the small peculiarities that made them unique. He thought of his own home, the radiator that clanged when it started, the chipped paint near the stairs, details only someone who lived there could recite. The man on the tape laughed softly, a dry, humorless sound. I've thought about telling her, about knocking on her door and confessing everything. She would scream, of course, call the police. But at least she would finally see me. At least I would be real to her, not just a shadow at the edge of her vision. The static swelled, hissed, then thinned again. I don't know how much longer I can keep this to myself. It's not safe for her. She should know someone is watching. She should know how close I am. The tape clicked softly, paused as if the recording had stopped. Daniel exhaled, shoulders loosening. He reached forward, intending to eject the cassette, to end it before it dug deeper. But the reels began to spin again, and the voice returned. She left her window open tonight. She's upstairs now, writing in her diary. I can see her lamp. She doesn't know how clearly I can see. She doesn't know I'm closer than ever. Daniel froze. The words pulsed in his ears, and for the first time he glanced toward the garage window. The blinds there were half drawn, pale light seeping through from outside. He thought of his own upstairs lamp, the one he left burning in his bedroom so the place would not feel empty. The tape hissed, then fell silent again, reels spinning in faint clicks. Daniel pressed stop with a trembling hand. The machine obeyed, but the silence that followed felt worse than the voice. Daniel sat in the garage with the machine silent before him, the only sound the faint tick of rain easing against the door. The pause button still depressed, the reel stilled mid-rotation, as if the tape were holding its breath. He told himself to eject it, to pull the cassette free, snap its fragile shell in two, and end whatever it had begun whispering into his life. He told himself he had heard enough, but silence can be crueler than noise. The longer he sat there, the more it thickened, pressing against his ears, amplifying the smallest sounds, the creak of his chair, the drip of condensation from a pipe, the scratch of his own fingers against his jeans. All of it too loud, too sharp, like his house was trying to prove it still belonged to him. Finally, with a muttered curse meant only to convince himself he was still in control, Daniel pressed play again. The machine clicked, the reels resumed their slow dance, and the voice returned as though it had been waiting. She's writing again. Same chair, same lamp, same diary. I almost know her pen strokes by sound now. I imagine the ink bleeding into the paper. Each word another secret she thinks no one hears. But I hear everything. The voice sighed. She leaves the window latch loose sometimes. I could reach it if I wanted. Just a little more effort. But I don't. Not yet. Daniel leaned back, running a hand across his face. The garage felt smaller, the ceiling lower. He should have stopped. He knew it, but the voice drew him in, a rope around his chest, pulling him forward. I memorized the sound of her radiator, the way it clanks when the heat begins, the way the pipes moan when the water shifts. It's louder at night, louder when she's alone. I think she doesn't notice, but I do. Daniel's blood ran cold. His eyes drifted involuntarily to the wall where his own radiator Saturday. Old pipes, ancient by modern standards, prone to clanging and hissing each winter night. How many times had he cursed the noise when trying to sleep? His chest tightened. Coincidence, he told himself. These buildings were all the same, decades old, fitted with the same cheap units. Anyone could have described it. The tape continued. She drinks tea before bed. Always the same mug, chipped on the rim. She sets it on the nightstand beside her diary, careful not to let it drip on the pages. The ring it leaves on the wood has darkened over time. I see it every night, the shadow of it in the lamplight. Daniel's throat went dry. He thought of the mug upstairs, the one with the crack along the handle. He had set it on his own nightstand countless times, leaving behind faint circles he had never bothered to scrub away. He pressed pause, heart thundering. This wasn't possible. His mind raced. Maybe someone had sold him a machine cursed with coincidence. Maybe the voice was describing another place entirely, a woman in another city, another apartment. The details were only common habits, universal quirks of life, weren't they? But the word diary stuck in his head. The nightstand ring. The radiator. Too exact, too familiar. Daniel rose abruptly, pacing the length of the garage. He told himself he would not listen further. He unplugged the recorder from the wall, yanked the cord free, set it aside. The machine's small indicator light died, yet the reels kept turning. He froze. The machine clicked faintly, the wheels grinding forward though no power flowed. The voice seeped through the speaker, softer now, almost whispering. She's leaving the light on in the hall tonight. A weak bulb, amber, buzzing. I can see the shadows it casts against her door. She thinks it makes her safe, but it only makes her visible. Daniel stumbled back, breath ragged. His hall light burned, just as described. He had left it on, out of habit, the bulb buzzing faintly above the narrow carpeted stretch. No, he muttered as though denial might shut the thing up. No, no, no. But the tape did not stop. She moves when she sleeps, tosses the blanket aside, curls it back again. She breathes heavier when she dreams. Sometimes she murmurs, half words, fragments. I wish I could lean close enough to hear them. I wish I could. The voice broke, then steadied. I'm closer now. I can almost reach her. Daniel lunged forward and hit stop. The reels stilled at last. The voice cut. The silence that followed roared in his ears, louder than the storm outside. He stood hunched over the machine, his hand trembling against the casing, sweat dripping down his temple. This wasn't real. It couldn't be, and yet he could not bring himself to eject the tape. Instead, he unplugged the machine entirely, set it beneath a heavy cloth, and walked upstairs to his bedroom. He told himself he needed rest. That exhaustion had made everything worse than it was. He locked the doors, checked the windows, then crawled into bed fully clothed. The radiator clanked alive. Pipes hissed. The sound, once familiar, now throbbed like a warning. He turned on the hall light, left his lamp burning beside the bed, anything to keep the dark from pressing too closely. He shut his eyes, but the voice lingered, threading through his thoughts, replaying each line. She's leaving the light on. She tosses the blanket. She breathes heavier when she dreams. When sleep finally took him, it was shallow, restless, and when he woke in the middle of the night, throat dry, heart racing, he thought for a moment he heard the faint hiss of static, not from a dream, not from the machine beneath the cloth downstairs, from the nightstand, right beside his ear. Daniel lay rigid in bed, the blanket tangled around his legs, the dim lamp beside him painting long shadows across the wall. His ears strained against the silence, yet the faint hiss lingered, steady as breath. He sat up slowly, heart hammering, and turned toward the nightstand. The lamp's amber glow lit the surface. His chipped mug, an unopened book, a pile of notes scribbled on envelopes. No machine, no speaker, only the phone charger coiled neatly, his keys glinting faintly. But the sound continued, the unmistakable static of a cassette in motion, soft but insistent, as though the wood itself had learned to speak. He pressed his palms to his ears. The noise remained, vibrating inside his skull. With a curse, he pushed out of bed, feet hitting the cold floor. The hallway bulb still glowed beyond the cracked door, buzzing faintly, casting its familiar amber wash. He stepped into the hall, the boards groaning beneath his weight. every sound amplified against the static that seemed to follow him. The garage door was shut, the machine buried beneath the cloth where he had left it, yet his chest told him otherwise. He descended the stairs, each step a hammer beat, until he reached the bottom and flicked on the kitchen light. The bulb flared, then dimmed, uncertain, before holding steady. The garage waited beyond. He hesitated at the threshold. The static swelled faintly, as though coaxing him closer. He turned the knob and entered. The recorder sat on the workbench, exactly where he had left it. The cloth covered it, but the shape beneath was unmistakable, the square bulk with its sharp corners. The reels inside should have been still. The machine had no power, yet the cloth trembled ever so slightly, pulsing in rhythm with the sound. Daniel's hand shook as he lifted the cover. The recorder hummed softly, reels turning without wires, without source. The tape's window glinted under the fluorescent light, its spools inching forward as though compelled by invisible fingers. He swallowed, his throat dry, and pressed stop. The reels kept turning. Static bled from the speaker. Then, faintly, the voice. She leaves her door cracked, just enough to see the glow of the lamp. She thinks the light will keep her safe. She doesn't realize it only makes the shadows sharper. Oh, Daniel's breath faltered. His bedroom door. He had left it cracked. The voice continued, calm, measured. She sits up in bed, the blanket twisted around her legs. She listens. She holds her breath. She wonders if the sound is real. Daniel staggered back a step. The machine was describing him. Not last night, not weeks ago now. This moment. His chest tightened with the recognition, his skin prickling as though the words had wrapped themselves around his body. The tape hissed, the reel spinning faster. She rises. She walks down the hall. Her feet creak against the boards. She tells herself she is imagining things. She tells herself the garage is empty. Daniel shook his head violently, the denial spilling from his lips in a hoarse whisper. No, stop. But the voice paid him no mind. She stands in the garage now. She stares at the machine. She wants to turn it off, but she knows it isn't recording the past anymore. She knows it's speaking the present. His knees nearly buckled. He reached for the cord, tried to yank it free, but remembered with dread that it wasn't plugged in at all. The machine pulsed, reels whirring faster, the sound growing clearer. She is afraid to look behind her. She knows what she will see if she does. Daniel froze, his back prickled with cold, a pressure forming between his shoulder blades. Every nerve screamed at him to turn, yet his body locked. His ears strained for a sound, a breath, a shift, a scrape. Only the machine spoke. She tells herself it is only me. But I am not the only one watching. His lungs seized. He forced himself to turn, spinning in place, but the garage yawned empty. Tools scattered, boxes piled, the concrete floor slick with shadows. No figure, no intruder. He staggered back against the bench, gripping its edge until his knuckles whitened. His pulse hammered. The tape crackled again. She checks. She doubts. She convinces herself there is nothing, but she will hear it again. Upstairs, at her bedside, the whisper she cannot mistake. Daniel's skin crawled. He slammed his palm against the stop button, then the eject. At last, the tape drawer clicked open. The cassette half spilled into his hand. He pulled it free, the reel still spinning faintly even without the machine, their momentum unnatural. He held it up, staring through the plastic window at the magnetic ribbon coiled inside. The hiss had stopped. Silence filled the garage again, heavy and absolute. Daniel exhaled shakily. He set the cassette on the workbench, reached for a hammer from the wall. If he crushed it, this would end. It had to end. He lifted the hammer. The cassette spoke, not from the machine, from the tape itself, the faint hiss vibrating through the plastic shell. She lifts the hammer. She thinks she can break me. She doesn't realize the recording is not mine. It's hers. The hammer slipped from his grip, clattering to the floor. His chest heaved. His mind scrambled. The voice had changed. No longer male, softer, higher, a woman's voice. His voice? He staggered, nearly toppling the stool. The cassette rattled across the workbench, as if shivering. She will go back upstairs now. She will try to sleep. She will not remember hitting stop. She will not remember holding me. But I will remember her. Daniel bolted from the garage, slamming the door behind him. His breath tore through his lungs as he stumbled up the stairs, into the hall, into his room. He shut the door, pressed his back to it, chest burning. The lamp still glowed on the nightstand. The mug still sat, chipped and ordinary. For a moment he convinced himself it was just a hallucination, a trick of nerves and exhaustion. Then the hiss returned. This time it came not from downstairs, not from the tape in the garage. It came from the cassette deck built into his bedroom stereo. The one he hadn't touched in years. The reels inside spun lazily, though it was empty. And the voice whispered once more, now unmistakably female, unmistakably his own. She's lying awake again. She doesn't know she's already on the tape. The hiss from the stereo filled the bedroom like a low tide, constant, invasive, without beginning or end. Daniel stood against the door, his body pressed into the wood as though bracing against an invisible current. The lamp's light flickered faintly, struggling, painting the walls with restless shadows. On the nightstand, the chipped mug seemed to glow in the amber wash. An artifact suddenly weighted with meaning. The reels in the deck turned, though the tray was empty. He could see the spindles spinning with stubborn precision, the motion steady and deliberate, as if guided by hands hidden deep within the machine. He wanted to pull the plug, rip the wires, hurl the whole thing against the wall, but his limbs would not obey. Then came the voice. She's standing by the door now, her back pressed tight. She thinks she can resist listening. She cannot. Daniel's throat closed. The voice had not faltered, not cracked. It was calm, clinical, inevitable. Worse still, it spoke in his own cadence. His voice, twisted by the ribbon of magnetic tape, reflected back at him with chilling accuracy. She's holding her breath. She doesn't realize I hear every beat of her heart, louder than the rain, louder than the storm. His chest heaved in sync with the words. He tried to force a breath opposite to the narration, to prove his autonomy, but his lungs betrayed him, releasing air just as the tape described. The reels spun faster. She moves now. One step forward, then another. She cannot help herself. She must see, and his body obeyed. One step, then another. The boards groaned beneath his bare feet. His hand trembled as he raised it, though he had not decided to move at all. The air smelled faintly of ozone and warm dust, the scent of overworked circuitry. He reached the nightstand, his fingers brushing the stereo's plastic frame. She wants to touch it. She wants to stop it, but she knows she cannot. He yanked his hand back, shaking his head violently, whispering through clenched teeth, "No, that's not me. That's not me." But the voice continued, merciless. She denies it. She repeats herself, as if words are stronger than tape. But the tape does not lie. The tape remembers what she forgets. Daniel's skin crawled, his vision blurred at the edges, as though the room itself were bending inward. He wanted to scream, to drown out the words, but he could not summon the air. She looks to the window. She wonders if someone outside is watching. She cannot see them, but she knows they are there. His head turned before he could stop it. The blinds were half drawn, the drizzle outside catching the glow of the street lamp. The rain had eased, leaving streaks down the glass like veins. He stared, wide-eyed, waiting for movement, for a silhouette. Nothing. Only his reflection, pale and trembling. The voice leaned closer. She doesn't realize the reflection is not hers. His stomach dropped. His reflection blinked once, slowly though his own eyes had not. Daniel stumbled backward, colliding with the bed frame. His legs tangled in the blanket, sending him sprawling onto the mattress. The hiss rose in pitch, the reels spinning with manic energy. She falls. She tangles herself. She makes herself helpless. Easier for me to watch. He scrambled upright, clawing at the blanket, ripping it free. His movements frantic. Every motion matched by narration. Every word a mirror that preceded the act by half a heartbeat. He shouted to drown it out, but his voice cracked and frayed, folding into the static until he could not tell which was his and which was the machine's. She screams. She wants it to stop, but she doesn't stop listening. His ears rang. He slammed his palms against the stereo, but the plastic burned cold, as though the machine had no temperature of its own. He pulled back, shaking his hands, chest heaving. She thinks she can fight it. She thinks she has a choice. She doesn't. And the words carved themselves into him, deeper than commands, more like truth revealed. His body slackened, his knees bending, lowering him back onto the bed. He sat there trembling, staring at the deck as the reel spun slower now, deliberate, patient. She sits, she waits, she listens, and now she hears what she has not wanted to hear. The static hushed, replaced by silence so sudden it rang in his ears. Then the voice, lower, softer, intimate. I have always been in her house. Before she moved in, before she thought it was hers. She brought me out when she touched the tape. She gave me her voice when she played it, and now I am recording her. Daniel's hands shook uncontrollably. His mouth opened, but no sound came. His mind flooded with denial, with desperate arguments, that this was technology failing, that paranoia had warped him, that exhaustion had birthed hallucinations. But the words refused to leave him. Recording her. The reel spun once more, slower than before, each turn deliberate. He could hear faint clicks, as though the record button had been pressed. The stereo no longer played. It listened. The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel felt his own breath echoing, the rustle of his clothes against the sheets, the hammer of his pulse. Every sound he made was captured, etched invisibly onto a ribbon of tape he could not see. His throat tightened. If he spoke now, it would not be his. It would belong to the machine. He rose unsteadily, each movement an act of rebellion, fighting against the invisible narration. He stumbled to the wall, yanked the plug from the socket. Sparks hissed faintly, the cord falling limp, but the reels kept turning, slower now. Patient, listening. Daniel pressed both hands against his ears, crouched in the corner, eyes locked on the deck. His thoughts spiraled. If it was recording him, how far would it go? Would it capture his fear, his heartbeat, the last sound of his breath if he never left this room? The silence thickened, oppressive. Then the speaker crackled. She's crouching now, in the corner. She's afraid to move. She thinks silence will save her, but silence is the loudest confession of all. Daniel choked on a sob, clamping a hand over his mouth. The reel spun one last time, then stopped. The deck fell quiet. He waited, frozen, minutes crawling into eternity. No sound, no hiss, nothing. At last, with trembling steps, he approached. The stereo sat inert, the reel still, its plastic frame lifeless. He dared to believe it had ended. He reached down, hand shaking, to touch it. The machine whispered, almost tender, almost kind, "Play me back." The words lingered in the room long after the machine had fallen silent. "Play me back." They had not been loud, not even clear, just a hushed command, almost coaxing, as though whispered into the hollow of his own ear. Daniel stood motionless above the stereo, his hands still hovering inches from the buttons, fingers trembling in the lamplight. Every instinct screamed at him to destroy it, to smash the casing, to tear the reels free, to bury the remnants where no one would find them. And yet, as he stared down at the machine, he felt the pull of something deeper than fear, a need. An itch in the back of his skull that told him he couldn't leave the story unfinished, that to walk away would be to live forever with the question of what had been captured. He swallowed, his throat tight and dry. Slowly, against his own better judgment, he pressed the play button. The reel stuttered, then turned. At first came the hiss, low and steady, the sound he had come to dread. But it wasn't long before the voice emerged. "My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I've done." Daniel froze. It was the beginning again, the same cadence, the same flat intonation. The confession had looped, circling back to where it started. Relief washed through him for a heartbeat. Perhaps it had been a hallucination, a trick of exhaustion. Perhaps the machine had never spoken beyond this point at all. But then the voice shifted. She found the recorder in her garage. She thought it was broken. She thought it was just another relic. But she fixed it. And when she pressed play, she gave me back my voice. Daniel's skin prickled. His pulse roared in his ears. The voice was no longer male, no longer the stranger he had heard before. It was his own voice, pitched low and steady, narrating the very moment he lived in. She thought she was safe upstairs. She thought the light would protect her. She thought silence meant solitude, but she was already on the tape. Every breath, every word, every denial. He staggered back, colliding with the nightstand. The lamp wobbled, nearly toppling. His reflection in the darkened window trembled. distorted by the streaks of rain. The reels spun faster. She stands now, in the bedroom, listening. She cannot look away. She cannot stop. She is being played back. She is nothing but playback. Daniel shook his head violently, clutching his temples, whispering, "No, no, no." But the tape spoke louder, overriding him, its cadence merging with his thoughts until he could no longer tell which voice came first. She says no. She denies. But denial is only another track, another groove etched into me. I already have her. I have her steps on the stair. I have her hand on the door. I have her scream when she thought she heard me. I have her silence when she crouched in the corner. I have everything. The air in the room pressed heavy, vibrating faintly with each word. The lamp flickered, dimmed, then burned brighter, throwing long, sharp shadows across the ceiling. Daniel stumbled to the window, yanked the blinds aside. Outside, the street was deserted, the drizzle soft against the pavement. No faces in the dark, no witnesses, just the reflection of his own hollow stare. The tape hissed. She looks for escape. She thinks the window will free her, but there is no outside anymore. Only inside, only me. His breath caught. For a moment, his reflection in the glass didn't move. Its eyes stared straight into his, unblinking, lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Daniel lurched back, tripping over the bed frame. He crawled across the floor, desperate, frantic, until his hands closed around the cassette itself. He yanked it from the deck, the reels spinning wildly in his grasp. The voice continued, not from the stereo, from the tape. She holds me now. She thinks she is strong enough to break me. But she is already inside. Her voice is mine. Her story is mine. She has no ending but the one I give her. Daniel screamed, raising the cassette high. He slammed it against the floor once, twice, until the shell cracked and plastic splintered across the boards. The ribbon spilled free, a coil of black shining faintly in the lamp's glow. He tore at it, ripping the tape into shreds, the thin magnetic strip curling around his fingers like veins. The voice did not stop. She destroys the vessel. She scatters the pieces. But a confession once spoken cannot be unsaid. The tape is only memory. I am already in her walls, in her wires, in her breath. The lamp shattered, plunging the room into sudden darkness. Daniel gasped, clawing through the strips of tape that clung to his skin. The hiss filled the air again, not from a single source, but everywhere, seeping through the floorboards, dripping from the ceiling, vibrating in the hollow of his chest. And then the voice, countless, layered, surrounding him. She is gone. She is mine. She is only playback now. The silence that followed was absolute. When neighbors knocked the next day, Daniel did not answer. Through the blinds, the faint glow of his lamp burned, though the bulb had been shattered. The garage smelled of rust and mildew. On the workbench sat the broken recorder, its reels still turning slowly, though no tape remained. And if one leaned close enough to the splintered cassette shells scattered across the floor, faintly, almost too faint to hear, there was still a voice. Replaying. Story 4. The Black Truck. The road at night had a way of hollowing the world out, stripping it down to nothing but the hum of the engine and the thin ribbon of asphalt stretched beneath the headlights. Chloe kept her hands steady on the wheel, the dashboard glow washing her knuckles pale green, her eyes fixed on the white lines flashing endlessly forward. She had been driving for hours, the clock pushing past midnight, the towns thinning into stretches of farmland and forest that seemed to swallow light whole. She told herself she didn't mind the solitude. She liked the rhythm of driving, the trance it pulled her into, the sense that time had slowed to match the steady sweep of the tires. But solitude had a way of changing its shape. In daylight, it was freedom. At night, it was exposure. The sky above was a vast slate, no stars visible through the thick clouds. Occasionally, the headlights caught the sheen of wet pavement, the glimmer of distant guardrails, or the reflective eyes of an animal darting back into the brush. The radio had fizzled into static an hour ago, and she hadn't bothered to try again. The silence suited her, at least until it didn't. She checked the rearview mirror. Nothing but darkness. The faint gleam of her taillights painted the edges of the road, swallowed almost instantly by the void behind her. She adjusted her posture, cracked her knuckles, and exhaled slowly. Another hour, and she would reach the next town, maybe find a motel, stretch her legs. That was when she saw the lights. At first, Just two pinpricks on the horizon, faint, easy to mistake for stars. But they grew steadily, the glow separating into the unmistakable twin beams of headlights. A vehicle moving faster than she expected. She checked her speed steady at 60. The road was wide, open. The car would pass soon enough. But when the lights drew closer, she realized it wasn't a car at all. It was taller, heavier, the glare higher off the ground. A truck. The vehicle approached, then slowed, its beams holding steady in her mirror. It didn't pass. Instead, it settled behind her, close enough that she could see the vague outline of its grille, the glint of chrome through the haze of its high beams. Chloe's grip on the wheel tightened. She eased her foot on the gas, accelerating slightly. The truck matched her. She slowed, pressing back toward 50. The truck slowed too, maintaining the exact same distance, a silent shadow tethered to her rear bumper. Her mouth went dry. It could be coincidence. Long-haul drivers played these games sometimes, matching speeds out of boredom. Or maybe it was a nervous driver, hesitant to pass on an empty highway. But the longer it stayed, the less like coincidence it felt. The road stretched ahead, empty, a black tunnel cut only by her headlights. She flicked on her turn signal, as though preparing to pull into the non-existent right lane. The truck didn't react. Its beam stayed fixed, unwavering. She told herself to ignore it. Focus forward. Just drive. But her eyes kept darting to the mirror, to the hulking shadow looming close enough that she could almost feel the vibration of its engine. Minutes bled into miles. The truck remained. The silence in the cabin grew unbearable. Chloe reached for the radio, twisting the dial until voices emerged through static, faint, and warbling. A preacher's sermon, broadcast from some distant station, cut in and out, and though you walk through the valley of the shadow, she turned it off almost immediately. The words had struck too close, their timing too sharp. She rubbed her temples, tried to steady her breathing. She thought of her father, who had taught her to drive on these same stretches of highway. "Keep your eyes ahead, not behind," he'd said, tapping the dash with one calloused finger. "What's behind you can't hurt you if you don't give it the chance." But tonight, it didn't feel true. Tonight, the danger lived in the rear view. She signaled again, this time swerving gently into the shoulder. The gravel crunched beneath her tires, the car jolting slightly. She flipped on her hazard lights, red triangles pulsing in the dark. If the truck wanted to pass, now was the chance. It slowed with her. She braked harder, coasting nearly to a stop. The truck followed, stopping a measured distance behind her. No horn, no attempt to pull alongside. It simply idled there, its engine a low growl swallowed by the wind. Chloe's heart pounded. She gripped her phone, thumb hovering over the screen. Call someone. Anyone. But who? 911. What would she say that a truck was following her? That it hadn't done anything but refused to go away? She glanced back. The windows of the truck were dark, tinted, no outline of a driver. Just the bulk of the vehicle, looming like a wall of steel in the night. Her hand shook as she shifted back into gear. The tires spat gravel as she accelerated onto the asphalt. The truck rolled forward, steady, patient, reclaiming its place behind her. The road stretched endless, the world reduced to two beams ahead and two behind. Chloe's chest tightened, the cabin shrinking around her. She muttered under her breath, fragments of prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood, bargaining with the night. An hour to the next town, 60 minutes. She could make it. She just had to keep driving. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew. The truck wasn't following the road. It was following her. The highway unfolded like a ribbon into darkness. No towns, no exits, just the endless hum of tires on asphalt. Chloe's palms clung to the wheel, damp with sweat, her knuckles bone white under the green wash of the dashboard. She checked the clock again, 1:14 a.m. Time seemed slower than the road, reluctant to move forward. Behind her, the black truck's headlights glowed unwavering, twin spears of white cutting through her rearview mirror. It never fell back, never advanced, always the same distance, as though tethered to her by an invisible line. She pressed harder on the accelerator. The engine whined, the speedometer needle climbing past 70, 75, 80. The road blurred at the edges, trees whipping by in distorted streaks. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths. The truck matched her, Its lights bobbed steady in the mirror, fixed at the same distance. No matter how fast she went, no matter how wildly she took the curves, it followed like a shadow bound to her bumper. Chloe's throat tightened. She eased her foot off the gas, letting the car drift back toward 60, then 50. Her tires hummed lower, the night thickened around her, but still the truck's headlights held their position. It was not chasing her, it was keeping her. She pressed her hand against her mouth to steady her breathing. The silence in the cabin was suffocating. She flicked on the radio again, desperate for any noise, but static clawed through the speakers, a long rasp that seemed to sync with her heartbeat. She shut it off quickly. Better silence than that. The fuel gauge caught her eye, just under half a tank, enough to make the next town if she could hold herself together that long. She tried to reason with herself. Maybe the driver was lost. Maybe they were heading to the same place, on the same route. Maybe they were as afraid of her as she was of them, but the logic crumbled as soon as she thought it. No one mirrored another car like this, not mile after mile, not through every acceleration and every hesitation. Her eyes flicked again to the mirror. The truck's windows were black, too dark. She had driven long enough to know how headlights usually revealed the faint outline of a driver, a flash of a steering wheel, some human presence. But here there was nothing, just the dark bulk of the cab and the gleam of chrome, faceless and impenetrable. She licked her dry lips, whispered to herself, 1 hour, just 1 hour. The road curved, the trees pressing closer on either side. She passed a faded green sign, its letters half-eaten by rust. Next exit, 43 miles. Her stomach dropped. No side roads, no escape. The night grew thicker. The clouds sagged low, smothering any hint of starlight. Her headlights carved tunnels into the void, each stretch of road appearing only as she reached it, vanishing as soon as she passed. The rhythm of it lulled and frightened, as though the world only existed when she touched it. Then, movement. She leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. Far ahead, a deer darted across the road, white tail flashing. She slammed the brakes, tires screeching, the seatbelt biting into her chest. The car fishtailed slightly before regaining traction. Her heart thundered. In the mirror, the truck slowed with her, effortless, smooth. The headlights never wavered. Chloe's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She gripped the wheel tighter, jaw clenched, muttering curses under her breath. Her phone lay on the passenger seat. She snatched it up, thumb fumbling across the screen. No signal, just the mocking outline of empty bars. She held the device high, angled it toward the windshield, toward the open sky, but nothing changed. She dropped it back, the sound too loud in the small cabin. Her mind scrambled through possibilities. If she pulled over again, the truck would only stop behind her. If she sped up, it would keep pace. If she slowed, it would too. So she tried something different. She flicked off her headlights. The world vanished. Her chest seized, darkness swallowing the road, the trees, the sky. Only the truck's beams remained, twin pillars burning into her rear view, stark and merciless. She drove blind for seconds that stretched like hours, then flipped the lights back on with a cry, the asphalt reappearing just in time for her to correct the veering tires. The truck never faltered. She whispered again, voice cracking. Why? The road stretched, relentless. Her body grew rigid, shoulders aching from tension, legs heavy on the pedals. Each mile dragged her deeper into exhaustion, but adrenaline refused to release her. She thought of her father again, of the way he used to say that the road was honest, that what you saw was what you got. But tonight the road was a liar. It offered her nothing but a stage for something else to play its game. At last, a glimmer. Red lights flickered ahead, distant but real. A construction zone, maybe, or a police car. Relief surged through her veins like a drug. She pressed the accelerator, desperate, leaning forward as though she could reach it faster. The glow grew brighter, closer. It was a flashing sign. Road work ahead. Merge left. Cones funneled traffic into a single lane, though there were no workers, no machinery, just the warning lights blinking in the dark. Chloe's pulse quickened. This was her chance. If she slowed enough, maybe the truck would be forced to pass. She eased into the single lane, her hazard lights blinking again. She nearly prayed aloud, "Please, please, go around me." But the truck followed. It straddled the cones. its bulk dwarfing the lane, lights unwavering. It did not slow. It did not pass. It simply kept her pace, as if the construction meant nothing to it. Chloe's mouth went dry. The red hazard glow reflected off her windshield, painting the cabin blood, dark, and still the truck loomed. Patient, merciless. The lane widened again, cones vanishing into the shoulder. She pressed the gas, desperate to escape, but her heart sank as the headlights behind her mirrored every move. She was not driving anymore. She was being driven. The thought made her chest clench. The car felt less like protection and more like a cage, glass and steel enclosing her while something vast and faceless pulled the strings. Her body trembled with the thought, what if it never ends? What if there is no town, no exit, no morning? What if the road is only this, me, and it, forever? The clock read 1:46 a.m. Time moved. The road did not, and the black truck followed. The minutes dragged like hours, the miles dissolving into sameness. Chloe's shoulders ached from the rigid way she gripped the wheel, her breath shallow, her eyes flicking between the endless road ahead and the mirror that glared with those twin beams behind. Her phone lay dark on the passenger seat. She snatched it again, thumb trembling across the glass, desperate for bars. Still nothing, not a flicker of service, just the hollow outline of connection refused. She jabbed at the emergency call screen, hoping the phone would force something through, but the screen stayed frozen, mocking her. "Come on," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please." The truck's lights burned in the mirror, steady as breath. Her body throbbed with exhaustion, nerves frayed to the edge. She couldn't keep this up. She needed someone, anyone, to see her, to prove she wasn't alone in this strange midnight corridor. Her eyes scanned the roadside, hunting for signs. A diner, a gas station, the familiar glow of neon. At last, a green board loomed, letters washed pale by her headlights. Rest area, 7 miles. Her chest surged with fragile hope. She pressed her foot down, speeding to 70, then 75, counting every mile like a prayer bead. The truck held its place, steady, patient, a hunter conserving strength. The rest area appeared as a pale glow in the distance, sodium lamps burning above a small lot, empty picnic tables, a vending machine hut, a handful of parking spaces lined with cracked white paint. It wasn't much, but it was light, and light meant witness. Chloe pulled into the exit lane, heart pounding, hazard lights flickering bright. The truck slowed with her, sliding into the curve. She swerved into the lot, gravel crunching under her tires, and jerked the car to a stop beneath the yellow glow of the lamps. She waited. The truck pulled in behind her, gliding to a stop across the lot, its headlights painting the pavement. The engine rumbled low, steady, vibrating in her chest. Chloe's hands shook on the wheel. She glanced at the vending hut. Its lights buzzed faintly, but the windows were empty, shelves bare. No attendant, no one else, just her and it. She slammed the horn. The blare shattered the stillness, echoing against the trees. She leaned on it until her ears rang, until her throat burned from the wordless cry that broke free with it. The truck did not move. It sat, idling, lights fixed on her. Her breath came ragged, panic gnawing at her edges. She threw the car into reverse, swung it around, and sped back toward the highway. Tires squealed, gravel spat. Her body pressed against the seat as she rejoined the empty ribbon of asphalt. The headlights followed. Hair fragilely, hope snapped. It wasn't following the road. It wasn't even following her speed. It was following her. Her mind spiraled. She thought of stories whispered at gas stations, truckers who vanished on long hauls, rumors of ghost vehicles stalking highways no map acknowledged. She'd laughed at them once, dismissed them as campfire talk for the restless and lonely, but the laughter had dried in her throat. Her chest tightened. She whispered her father's words again, like a charm against the dark. Keep your eyes ahead. What's behind can't hurt you. But it was a lie now. What was behind her was the only thing that could. The road stretched onward, black and endless. Signs blurred past, unreadable. No exits, no stations, no other cars. She tried again to call. Still nothing. She hurled the phone onto the seat with a choked sob, gripping the wheel so tight her arms ached. The clock glowed. 2:07 a.m. Time was moving, But the world was not. The truck remained. She pressed harder on the gas, desperate for speed, but her body screamed with fatigue. Her eyes blurred, her mind fogging at the edges. She slapped her cheek, pinched her thigh, anything to stay awake. In the mirror, the lights burned steady. She flicked her high beams, signaling, begging, "What do you want?" The truck did not answer. Her vision caught movement. Up ahead, a lone structure flickered with neon. A gas station, its canopy lights buzzing above two pumps. Relief surged, sharp and painful in her chest. She veered into the exit, tires screeching against the curve. The lot was deserted. No cars, no clerk behind the glass. Only a row of darkened shelves visible through the window, dust thick on their surfaces. She pulled up anyway, slammed the car into park, and bolted out, her legs trembling. The night air struck cold against her sweat-soaked shirt. She pounded on the door of the convenience store, shouting, "Hello, hello, please." No answer. The hum of the truck rose behind her. She turned. It had pulled into the lot, its bulk filling the entrance, headlights cutting through her body. The tinted windows revealed nothing. No driver, no face, just darkness. Her breath broke into sobs. She stumbled back into her car, fumbling with the lock, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared alive, her hands slick on the wheel. She reversed, spun, and tore back to the highway, the truck gliding after her like a shadow. Her body shook. Her teeth chattered though the night was warm. She whispered nonsense to herself, prayers, curses, fragments of songs, anything to fill the silence. But the truth pressed in. The world had emptied itself for her and the truck alone. The clock glowed. 2:41 a.m. No other headlights came. No taillights ahead. Only her. Only it. And no matter how far she drove, the distance between them never changed. The hours had bled together until time itself felt fraudulent, a number glowing faintly on her dashboard that no longer held meaning. 3:27 a.m. or 4:12, it didn't matter. The road stretched on, an artery without end, pulsing beneath her tires. And behind her, always, the truck, Chloe's eyelids stole. Her body trembled from fatigue, muscles wound tight, fingers clawed into the steering wheel so long her joints ached. Her reflection in the side window looked gaunt, eyes hollow, mouth trembling as if it no longer belonged to her. She could not do this forever. Her heart pounded, wild and erratic. Fear, exhaustion, rage tangled into one sharp edge. She slammed her palm against the steering wheel, the horn blaring across the empty highway. Her scream followed, raw, torn from her throat. Enough. The sound disappeared into the night. The truck did not answer. It only followed, her breathing ragged. Chloe made a decision. If it wanted her, then let it come. She would not let herself be toyed with mile after mile, eaten alive by anticipation. She would make it show itself. Her foot pressed the accelerator hard, the speedometer climbing. 80, 85, 90. The road blurred, trees whipping into smears of shadow, the car shuddering from the strain. The truck matched, its beams unwavering, steady as if the laws of physics bent to its will. Chloe's jaw clenched. She swerved, cutting hard into the shoulder, gravel spitting beneath her tires. The car jolted violently, her seatbelt biting her collarbone. She yanked the wheel, sliding back onto the asphalt. The truck followed without hesitation, without error, as though tethered to her shadow. Her chest tightened, sweat poured down her back. The realization pressed cold and final. She could not shake it. She could not outrun it. So she would stop. Her breath came fast, shallow. Her hands shook on the wheel as she flicked on the hazard lights. Red triangles blinked across the empty road. She slowed, heart hammering, the truck's beams swelling larger in the mirror as it closed the gap. 40, 30, 20. She pulled to the shoulder and braked to a stop. The car shuddered, the engine idling low. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint tick of cooling metal. The truck slowed, rolled to a stop behind her. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that its lights drowned her in white. Chloe sat frozen, sweat slick on her palms. Her breath fogged the windshield. She waited. Nothing. The truck's engine purred, low and patient. No door opened. No figure stepped out. Her chest heaved. She forced herself to move, to unclip the seatbelt. The click sounded too loud. Final. She reached for the door handle. Her fingers hesitated. What if it's what it wants? Her jaw trembled. She pushed the thought aside and yanked the door open. Cold night air rushed in, damp with the smell of wet asphalt and pine. She stepped out, legs trembling, her sneakers crunching against gravel. The world was black except for the white beams behind her, so bright they flattened everything into silhouette. She raised a hand to shield her eyes, squinting into the glare. "Who are you?" she shouted, her voice shaking, swallowed quickly by the dark. No response. The engine rumbled. Steady, patient. Her hands curled into fists. She took a step forward, then another, gravel shifting beneath her shoes. The lights grew harsher, bleaching her vision, searing after images into her eyes. "Stop this, what do you want from me?" Still nothing. Her throat burned. Rage pushed against her fear. She staggered closer, blinking through the brightness. She could make out the hulking silhouette of the truck's cab, the gleam of chrome on its grille, but the windows remained black, opaque, like slabs of stone. She stopped a dozen feet away, heart hammering so loud it drowned the engine. Her fists shook at her sides. "Get out," she screamed. The truck's engine fell silent. The sudden absence of sound was worse than its presence. The night pressed in, too wide, too empty. Chloe's ears rang in the void. Her breath hitched. Her knees trembled. The headlights remained, blazing. Slowly, impossibly, the truck began to move. Not forward, not backward. Its wheels did not turn, yet its body seemed to swell, the cab leaning, the grille tilting down as though the vehicle itself had bent to look at her. Chloe stumbled back, hands raised, a strangled sob breaking free. The beams flared brighter, swallowing her, burning her vision white. She clutched her face, eyes streaming, the light pressing through her lids until it felt as though it had burrowed into her skull. The engine roared alive again, deeper now, a growl that shook the ground beneath her feet. Chloe screamed, stumbling toward her car. Her hands fumbled at the handle, her vision fractured by afterimages. She yanked the door open, threw herself inside, and slammed it shut just as the truck's horn shattered the night long, guttural, vibrating her bones. She jammed the key into the ignition, engine catching with a desperate whine. The headlights behind her glared, swallowing the mirrors, drowning everything in white. She pressed the gas, tires screaming against the asphalt, the car lurching forward, her chest seized as she swerved back onto the highway, her pulse racing beyond control. In the mirror, the truck followed, steady, patient, as though nothing had happened at all. The highway blurred beneath Chloe's tires, mile after mile devoured by fear and adrenaline. Her body throbbed with exhaustion, her throat raw from screaming, her eyes burning with the afterimages of those white beams. She drove on instinct now, hands clamped to the wheel, the world reduced to a narrow tunnel of asphalt and shadow. Behind her, as always, the truck. Its lights never wavered, never dimmed, never changed their distance. Steady, patient, waiting. Her chest ached. Each breath scraped her lungs like broken glass. She whispered to herself, voice quivering, "Just a little farther, just a little longer, please." At last, salvation appeared, a pair of flashing red and blue lights strobing faintly on the horizon. Chloe blinked against tears, hardly daring to believe. Police. Real. Human. Undeniable. She pressed the gas, desperation pushing her forward. The patrol car sat angled across the shoulder, its lights pulsing against the trees. An officer leaned against the hood, clipboard in hand, his silhouette sharp in the strobes. Chloe's sob broke free, relief flooding her chest. She swerved toward the shoulder, hazards blinking, and rolled to a stop a dozen feet from the cruiser. The truck slowed too, its headlights dimmed. Then, for the first time all night, it eased onto the opposite shoulder and parked, still, silent, a hulking shadow. Chloe's hands shook as she shoved her door open and stumbled out. The gravel bit into her sneakers, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. "Help!" she cried, voice cracking. "It's following me. That truck, it's been behind me for hours." The officer straightened, his face catching the strobe. He was older, heavy-set, with deep lines etched into his brow. His hand lifted in a calm gesture. "Ma'am, slow down," he said evenly. "Tell me what's going on." She pointed wildly toward the opposite shoulder. "That truck." It won't leave me alone. It matches my speed. It follows every turn, every stop. The officer squinted into the dark. The truck loomed across the road, silent, unmoving, windows black. He lowered his clipboard, his eyes narrowing. How long has this been happening? Since midnight, she gasped. I don't. Her words dissolved into ragged sobs. The officer stepped closer, voice steady, almost rehearsed. All right, ma'am. First thing, I need you to stay calm. Second thing, let's take a look at your vehicle. Chloe blinked at him, confusion cutting through her fear. What? No, it's the truck. Look at the truck. He shook his head slightly, expression unreadable. Your vehicle first. Her stomach twisted. Still, she obeyed, stumbling toward her car. The hazard lights clicked softly, too steady against the thunder in her ears. The officer circled the vehicle slowly, his flashlight beam sweeping across the paint, the windows, the plates. The beam paused. His voice cut the silence. Ma'am, you aware this isn't your license plate? Chloe froze. What? The officer crouched, tapping the metal square with his flashlight. This plate, it's fake. Cheap laminate job. Doesn't even have the right state seal. Her blood ran cold. That's not possible. I've never. Her knees nearly gave out. She stared at the numbers, the letters she had driven with for years. But they weren't hers. They weren't right. I don't understand, she whispered. The officer straightened, his face grave. Someone swapped it, ma'am. Recently. Probably while you were parked somewhere tonight. His eyes flicked to the truck across the road, then back to her. And if I had to guess, that's why he's here. Chloe's mouth opened, but no sound came. The night pressed against her, heavier than before. The officer's words came slow, deliberate, like a sentence being read aloud. That truck wasn't chasing you. He wasn't trying to catch you. He was waiting. Her chest collapsed inward. She turned, eyes locking on the hulking shadow across the highway. The truck's lights flickered once, bright and sharp, then went dark. For the first time all night, the road behind her was empty, but her car was not. She heard it then soft, deliberate, the sound of leather shifting against fabric, the faint intake of breath from the back seat. Chloe's scream tore into the night, but the highway swallowed it whole. Story 5. The Living Room Rule. When Mark first moved into the house, he thought of it as nothing more than a stopgap, the kind of place you endure for a year while saving for somewhere better. It was a narrow 2-story rental with paint that peeled along the shutters and steps that sagged beneath the weight of time. The landlord had warned him that the plumbing rattled and that the locks were old, but Mark had shrugged it off. He'd lived in worse. A roof overhead was a roof, and the rent was cheap enough to keep his student loans from strangling him completely. The house carried the scent of damp plaster and dust, a smell that seemed baked into the wallpaper no matter how many windows he opened. The living room, however, felt oddly different from the rest. It had a certain stillness, a muted quality as if sound itself softened against its walls. A single overhead bulb cast a pale yellow wash that didn't quite reach the corners, leaving the edges in permanent twilight. Mark made it his anchor. He set his couch there, angled toward a second-hand television. He stacked his books on a milk crate beside the armrest. A cheap rug spread across the creaking floorboards. It wasn't much, but it gave the impression of stability. It wasn't until the second week that he noticed the doors. The house had more than he expected. One to the kitchen, one to the downstairs bath, another narrow one that led to the basement stairs, plus 3 upstairs bedrooms and a second bath. They were ordinary doors, their white paint chipped, their brass knobs dulled by decades of hands. He would close them out of habit, sometimes even lock them, especially the basement door that always seemed to draft a stale, earthy smell. But every time he left the living room for more than a few minutes, the doors would be open again. At first, he blamed himself. Maybe he had been careless, distracted while hauling boxes or juggling groceries. Maybe the warped wood of the frames kept them from latching properly. But the pattern persisted. He would shut the bathroom door before bed, only to find it ajar in the morning. He would lock the kitchen door when cooking, only to find it wide again after stepping away. The realization dawned slowly, as most unsettling things do. It wasn't just that the doors opened on their own. It was that they only did so when he wasn't in the living room. One late night, half dozing on the couch with the glow of the television washing across his face, Mark rose to fetch a drink. He passed the basement door, closed firmly as always, and padded toward the kitchen. When he returned minutes later, bottle in hand, the basement door hung wide, the darkness below yawning like an open throat. He stood in the doorway, chilled, listening for the creak of a step or the rush of air. But the house remained silent. From then on, he paid attention. When he sat in the living room, the doors stayed closed. The house seemed contained, still, as though holding its breath. But if he left even for seconds, something shifted. A latch undone, a frame eased open, a door swinging wider than it had any right to. He tested it. One evening, he shut every door tight, twisting each knob until it clicked, even dragging a chair in front of the basement entrance. He sat back down on the couch, eyes fixed. Hours passed. Nothing moved. But when he finally stood to use the bathroom, leaving the living room's dim light behind, he returned to find the chair slid gently aside, the basement door gaping once more. The sensation it gave him was not of intruders. Not exactly. There were no footprints, no signs of forced entry, no missing objects. Instead, it felt like the house itself insisted on keeping passageways open, as though walls were not meant to divide and boundaries were not meant to hold. Mark tried to rationalize. Old wood swelled and contracted with temperature. Hinges loosened. Frames shifted. He Googled structural quirks and paranormal forums alike, toggling between science and superstition, neither satisfied. Still, he adjusted his habits. He kept his bedroom door shut but stopped locking it. He avoided glancing too long at the basement. He told himself it was simply an eccentricity of the house, a quirk to be tolerated like the leaky faucet or the moaning pipes. But quirk or not, it made him feel watched. Sometimes, as he sat on the couch with a book balanced in his lap, he would sense it, the prickle of awareness along his neck, the faint impression that beyond those doorways, just out of sight, something waited for him to step away. One night, as wind rattled the shutters and branches scratched faintly against the siding, he swore he heard the soft whisper of a hinge moving, though he hadn't risen. He set the book aside, heart beating harder, ears straining against the hum of the bulb. The living room held its breath with him when he gathered the nerve to check. Every door was exactly where he had left it, closed. He sat back down, but sleep eluded him. The stillness of the living room no longer felt like safety. It felt like condition, a rule, one he hadn't agreed to, but one he was already obeying. And he began to wonder not whether the house wanted its doors open, but what might want them open for it. Mark had never thought of himself as superstitious. He'd laughed at his aunt's charms against the evil eye, rolled his eyes at his roommate's obsession with ghost hunting shows, and dismissed every creak of an old house as the natural music of settling beams. But after 2 weeks in the rental, laughter came less easily. The living room rule, as he had come to call it in his head, hung over his days like a weight. It dictated his movement, his habits, even his sleep. He found himself lingering longer in the living room, reluctant to leave, sometimes even carrying his meals to the couch just to avoid the feeling that something waited beyond. But avoidance wasn't enough. He needed proof. On a rainy Tuesday, after returning from work, Mark set his plan. He borrowed a small camera from the office, a security demo unit that still carried the company's label, and positioned it on a shelf across the living room. Its angle captured the hallway where the bathroom, kitchen, and basement doors lined up like watchful eyes. He tested it, stepping out and back, replaying the short clips on his laptop. The quality was grainy in the dim light, but the shapes of the doors were clear enough. Satisfied, he settled in for the night. The house groaned with the storm. Rain pattered against the windows, the old siding shivering with gusts of wind. Mark sat on the couch, laptop balanced on his knees, pretending to work while the unease crawled beneath his skin. Every so often, he rose deliberately, making some excuse to himself. Refill water, check his phone charger, grab a sweater. Each time, he left the living room for minutes, then returned. Each time, without fail, a door stood ajar. The basement most often, sometimes the bathroom. The pattern held. Hours later, long past midnight, he gathered the courage to review the footage. The first clips were uneventful. He would step out. The camera would catch the empty frame of the living room. Then seconds later, he'd return. A door now opened behind him. No sound, no flicker of movement. The openings happened in silence, as if the house itself had shifted between frames. But then he reached the fourth clip. He leaned closer, squinting at the grainy image. He had stepped out to the kitchen. The living room stood empty, the bulb casting its pale cone of light. For 10 seconds, nothing stirred. Then the basement door, at the far edge of the frame, eased open with slow deliberation. Mark's skin prickled. He watched, unblinking. The door swung wider, halting at an angle as if held there by some unseen hand. The frame darkened, swallowing more of the hall. The seconds crawled, and then just for a moment there was a shape. Not clear, not human exactly, but something. A patch of darkness denser than the rest, standing where the hall met the basement threshold. It lingered no more than 2 seconds, then dissolved as Mark re-entered the room. He replayed it over and over, pausing, squinting, until his eyes watered. It could have been a trick of compression, an artifact of the low-light recording, but the longer he stared, the more it resembled form. A shoulder, a tilt of head, a shadow standing where no shadow belonged. Mark shut the laptop sharply, his breath ragged. The rain beat harder against the windows, rattling the frame. He pressed his palms to his face, whispering, "It's just video noise, just noise." But the certainty didn't come. Sleep eluded him that night. He left the living room bulb burning, dozing fitfully on the couch with the blanket pulled to his chin. Each time his eyes closed, he dreamed of thresholds, rows of doors, all swinging open, and something waiting in the spaces between. By morning, his body ached with unrest. He showered, dressed, and nearly convinced himself he had exaggerated the footage. But when he returned home that evening, the camera still running, he felt the pull again. He recorded more clips, testing, experimenting. He timed his absences, counted the seconds until the doors opened. The pattern was consistent, always between 20 and 40 seconds after he left the living room. A door would swing wide, but it wasn't random. The basement most often, yes, but sometimes the bathroom, sometimes the narrow linen closet upstairs, as though whatever force moved them wanted variety, or perhaps was searching for something. Mark's notes filled quickly, columns of times, durations, which doors had opened. His logical brain clung to the data, desperate for control. But beneath the numbers grew dread, because in one clip, when he slowed it frame by frame, he caught more than shadow. It was the glint of eyes. Just 2 points of reflection, faint but undeniable, staring directly at the camera before winking out as he returned. Mark closed the laptop and shoved it under the couch cushions, his stomach lurching. He couldn't bring himself to watch more. The rain had stopped, but the silence in the house was heavier than the storm. He sat motionless for hours, staring at the basement door, daring it to move while he remained. It didn't. It never did when he watched. By dawn, one thought repeated in his mind, relentless, inescapable. It wasn't the doors that wanted to be open. It was something on the other side, waiting for him to leave. Mark had always thought of himself as practical. When something broke, he fixed it. When something didn't make sense, he reasoned it out. But nothing about the house had bent to reason, and the longer he lived with the rule, the more it began to feel less like a curiosity and more like a demand. Every night he obeyed without realizing it. He would leave the living room and return to open doors, his heart racing, his excuses piling higher. But what if he didn't leave? What if he simply sat, stubborn and unmovable, until the night gave up on him? The idea took root one Wednesday evening. He locked the front door, slid the bolt, drew the curtains tight, and carried every necessity into the living room. Water bottle, a thermos of coffee, his laptop, a blanket, his phone with the charger stretched from the nearest outlet. He dragged an armchair from the corner and propped it against the basement door just in case. Then he settled onto the couch with the determination of a man preparing for siege. The room glowed faintly beneath the ceiling bulb. Its light was yellow, humming quietly, never quite reaching the corners. Beyond the open archways, the house slumbered in deeper shadow, its unseen rooms closed off behind paint-peeled doors. For once, he meant to keep them that way. He checked his watch. 10:32 p.m. The experiment began. At first, nothing happened. The house groaned softly, the way it always did, wood expanding, pipes shifting, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Mark sat upright, eyes fixed on the hall. The doors remained where he'd left them, closed. Minutes stretched. He sipped coffee, forced his eyelids wider. He told himself this was ridiculous. that he would waste an entire night just to prove the obvious, that doors didn't open when he was present. But as the hour deepened, the air seemed to grow heavier. The silence was not silence at all, but a kind of waiting. The bulb's hum pressed against his ears. The shadows in the corners seemed thicker, as if they carried weight. At 11:07, he thought he heard something shift. A faint sigh, like wood underfoot. He leaned forward, heart quickening. The hallway stretched empty, the doors lined in stillness. He waited, breath held. Nothing moved. He sat back, telling himself it was his nerves. Midnight came. The digital glow of his laptop clock ticked over, its colon blinking once, twice. Mark's chest tightened. Midnight always carried a weight, a hinge between ordinary time and the stretch of hours that belonged to the house alone. Still he didn't move. The bulb flickered once. His breath caught. It steadied. He rose only to stretch, pacing the perimeter of the rug, eyes never leaving the hallway. The basement door stayed closed. The chair braced firm against it. The bathroom and kitchen doors were tight in their frames. He almost laughed, though it came out as a strained rasp. "See? Nothing," he muttered aloud. "I'm here. They can't open if I don't leave." The sound of his voice startled him. It seemed to echo strangely, bouncing softer than it should, as though the walls absorbed it. He sank back onto the couch, pulling the blanket over his lap, clutching his mug. 1 a.m. The coffee turned sour in his stomach. His eyes ached from staring. The air felt colder, though the thermostat hadn't shifted. 2 a.m. He fought the weight of fatigue, pinching his thigh, shaking his head. Shadows seemed to crawl higher along the corners, stretching toward the ceiling. By 3, the silence pressed so thick that even his breathing sounded intrusive. And then it began. Not a door. Not at first. It was the sound of hinges, not swinging, but flexing, as if something leaned against them from the other side. A faint groan, then stillness. Another, longer, like someone pressing a palm flat against wood. Mark's heart lurched. He gripped the blanket tighter, eyes fixed on the hall. The bathroom door shivered, just once. A tremor more felt than seen. The bulb flickered again. The room seemed to dim, the edges retreating further into shadow. Mark whispered to himself, "I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. You can't open if I don't leave." The basement door groaned. The chair against it shifted a hair. Wood scraping wood. Mark bolted upright, breath sharp. The chair held, but something pressed steadily from behind, bending the door inward. Not enough to break, but enough to bulge. Then, as though realizing resistance, it eased back. The silence thickened again. Mark sank slowly onto the couch, chest tight, hands trembling. 4 a.m. The hours crawled. He did not sleep. He did not move. He sat in defiance, though every nerve screamed to run. The house did not open its doors, but it did not forgive him either. At 4:37, his laptop screen flickered. The camera feed, still running, showed the empty frame of the living room, except he was sitting there. Or rather, something was. Mark leaned closer, blood freezing. The grainy feed displayed the couch, the coffee table, the yellow wash of the bulb, and on the couch sat a shape, dark, indistinct, but in the place where he Saturday, as though the camera could not decide if he was present or not. He looked from the laptop to the couch around him. Empty. His own body sat here, yet the feed suggested a duplicate, a shadow occupying the same seat. He slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding. The silence returned, absolute. When dawn finally seeped through the curtains, pale and thin, Mark was still on the couch. He had not left the room once. The doors remained closed, and yet he could not shake the thought that something had shifted. Not in the doors, not in the house, but in the rule itself. Because all night, the air had seemed to whisper not leave and they will open but stay too long, and something else will come through anyway. Mark spent the rest of the afternoon on the couch, too drained to move, his body heavy as stone. The shattered glass in the kitchen remained where it had fallen, glittering faintly when sunlight shifted through the blinds. He couldn't bring himself to clean it, couldn't bring himself to step beyond the room. The living room bulb hummed overhead, steady and monotonous, the only sound between his ragged breaths. He stared at it until his eyes burned, convinced that if the light died, so would he. Evening fell slowly. Shadows stretched across the carpet, swallowing corners that the bulb could not reach. The air grew thicker, cooler, pressing damp against his skin. By nightfall, the house was breathing again. He could hear it in the walls, the faint tick of expanding wood, the low moan of pipes, the sigh of old plaster. But beneath it, something steadier, a rhythm, like the faint intake and exhale of lungs. He tried to ignore it. He wrapped the blanket tighter, sat cross-legged on the couch, muttering to himself, "I'll stay here. I won't leave. I won't." But the house no longer cared whether he stayed. At 11:43, the first door opened. Mark heard it, the long groan of hinges, slow and deliberate. His head jerked toward the hall. The basement door stood wide. His stomach dropped. The living room had always kept them closed when he was inside. That had been the rule. But now, the house had rewritten it. A second sound followed the bathroom door swinging open, creaking against the wall. Then the closet, then the upstairs bedrooms. One by one, every door in the house yawned wide, as though inviting passage. Mark's heart hammered. He rose unsteadily, backing toward the farthest corner of the living room, eyes darting from frame to frame. Darkness poured from every threshold, thick and velvety, stretching fingers across the floorboards. The bulb flickered. "No," Mark whispered. "Please, not now." It steadied, but dimmer than before, its yellow light frail against the swell of shadow. And then he saw it. In the hallway, framed by the basement door, the figure leaned again. But this time it did not hesitate. It stepped forward. Its body was not quite solid darkness-given form, wavering at the edges, taller than the frame, shoulders scraping the top, where a face might have been. There was only a deeper absence, a void within void. Mark pressed himself against the wall, chest seizing, throat locked. His hands trembled violently. The figure moved slowly, each step impossibly heavy, boards groaning under its weight. It crossed the hall, pausing at the bathroom threshold. Another figure followed, identical, peeling itself from that doorway like shadow unglued. Mark's knees gave. He collapsed onto the rug, scrambling backward on hands and heels. His breath tore from him in ragged sobs. The figures multiplied. One from the closet, two from the upstairs landing. Each taller than seemed possible, each bending forward, as though space itself shrank around them. Their forms bled into the walls, stretched along the floor, but their steps were real. The bulb overhead flickered wildly, buzzing like a trapped insect. Mark screamed, clutching his head, rocking against the wall. "Stop, stop, I stayed. But the rule had changed. The figures pressed closer, filling the archway. Their edges rippled as if made of smoke, but the floorboards cracked beneath their weight. The air grew colder, thick with damp earth, and something acrid, metallic. The bulb burst. Glass rained onto the rug, sparks fading into black. The living room drowned in shadow. Mark's breath came fast, shallow. His hands fumbled in the dark, searching for anything, a lamp, a flashlight, even his phone. But the darkness swallowed orientation, direction, the sense of space itself. He could not tell if he was still in the living room or somewhere else entirely. And then a whisper, close, right beside his ear. "You don't leave the living room." Mark froze, his body rigid, every nerve shrieking. The whisper came again, this time from the opposite side. "You don't leave," he sobbed, covering his ears. But the voices layered, multiplying, filling the dark, all speaking in the same low, measured tone. "You don't leave. You don't leave. You don't leave." Hands brushed his arms cold, damp, fingers too long, too many. His body convulsed, curling in on itself. He tried to scream, but the voices smothered him, pressing into his skull until they became his own thoughts. The last thing he saw, though, whether with his eyes or in his mind he could not tell, was the living room itself. Doors all flung wide, and the shadows stepping through. Endless, tireless. The house no longer wanted him to stay. It wanted him to belong. Story 6. The Forest Stair. Sam had chosen the cabin because of its silence. As a wildlife researcher, he had spent years in places where the presence of others contaminated his work, where footsteps drowned out the small rustles of animals, where human breath muddied the air with scents not meant to linger in the forest. The cabin, remote and nearly forgotten, was perfect, tucked against a slope in the northern woods. It stood 3 miles from the nearest dirt road and 10 from the nearest town. Silence here was not an absence. It was a substance. On most nights, Sam sat at the desk by the wide window, its frame rough with decades of weather, and listened to the forest hum. Rain dripped from needles. Owls muttered low in the branches. Foxes cracked twigs in their stealthy wanderings. Each sound meant something, and he wrote it all, filling page after page with notes in his tight script. That evening, rain swept hard against the roof, rattling in steady sheets. The smell of wet pine and damp earth seeped through the wood, mixing with the acrid tang of kerosene from the lamp. Sam wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, sipping lukewarm coffee as he worked through his notes. The cabin creaked occasionally, but otherwise the storm muffled everything, enclosing the world in a curtain of gray, until he looked up. Through the rain-streaked glass, half hidden by the sway of trees, a figure stood. At first he thought it was a trick of water on the glass, shapes coalescing into the semblance of form. But the longer he looked, the clearer it became. A woman. She stood maybe 50 yards from the cabin, just beyond the clearing, where the pines crowded close together. The rain fell over her, soaking hair and dress, yet she did not move. Not a flinch, not a shiver, and she was staring at him. Sam's breath caught in his throat. He set the mug down too quickly, spilling coffee across the desk, but his eyes never left the window. He leaned closer, squinting through the rain. Yes, a woman, tall, thin, her posture rigid, her face pale against the dark wash of trees, though distance blurred its features. She stood with her arms at her sides, her body angled directly toward the cabin, her gaze fixed. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, she was still there. Sam's pulse quickened. He had lived here for weeks without seeing another human. The land was posted private, marked with weathered signs a mile from the tree line. Hikers didn't come this far, not in storms. He rose slowly, joints stiff from hours at the desk, and reached for the binoculars hanging by the door. The strap was damp with old use, the lenses smudged. He lifted them, adjusted, and brought the figure into sharper view. Rain streaked her face, but her eyes dark, unblinking, met his through the glass. She was not shivering, not shielding herself from the storm, not moving at all. Sam lowered the binoculars, his breath clouding the pain. His mind scrambled for explanation. A lost hiker? Someone from town playing a prank? But no vehicle could reach this place. No one should know he was here. He stood at the window for long minutes, waiting. The figure did not move. Finally, he forced himself back into the chair, though every nerve in his body screamed against it. He tried to return to his notes, pen scratching across damp paper, but the words slipped meaningless beneath his hand. His gaze kept dragging back to the glass. The woman had not shifted. Her stillness unnerved him more than any approach. Animals moved. Even hunters breathed heavily, adjusted their stance, gave themselves away in 100 tiny gestures. But she was fixed, a statue carved of rain and shadow. Sam lit a second lamp, the warm glow pushing against the gloom. The cabin felt smaller for it, walls pressing close. He pulled the blanket tighter, muttering under his breath. Just weather, just nerves. But the hair at the back of his neck prickled, an ancient instinct warning what his rational mind refused to accept. He checked the clock. 9:18 p.m. Outside, the woman stood. Rain poured harder, thick sheets rattling against the roof. Thunder rolled distant. Sam's pen lay forgotten. He sat with his hands clenched, eyes locked on the window. And in the glass, a thought rooted itself, stubborn and unshakable. She wasn't standing in the forest. She was standing for him. The storm did not ease. If anything, it deepened, rain lashing harder against the cabin roof, a steady roar that blurred the edges of sound. Sam sat in his chair with the binoculars clutched loosely in his hands, staring at the glass. The woman had not moved. Water poured down her face, dark hair plastered against her skull. Her dress, if that's what it was, clinging to her thin frame. Her posture remained fixed, shoulders square, eyes locked across the distance. Sam's rational mind reeled. There had to be an explanation. People did not stand motionless in the woods for an hour during a downpour. If she was real, she had to be in trouble, disoriented, maybe injured. A hiker caught off trail. But in weather like this, at this hour, he checked the binoculars again, Her eyes reflected light faintly, catching the glow from his cabin lamps. Too steady, too direct. He set the glasses down and rubbed his face with both hands, muttering, "Okay, options. Either she's real or she isn't. If she's real, she needs help. If she's not," his voice trailed off. "If she wasn't, then what?" The cabin creaked under the weight of the storm. Sam stood abruptly, unable to sit still, and paced the small room. The air smelled of wet wood and kerosene, thick and sharp. His boots thudded against the rug, each step quick, agitated. He considered calling out, but the rain would swallow his voice, and some part of him recoiled from the idea. What if she answered? The clock read 9:42. Nearly half an hour had passed. She hadn't twitched. Finally, he strode to the door, flung it open, and stepped onto the porch. The rain struck him instantly, soaking his shirt, cold needles stinging his skin. He squinted into the clearing. The woman stood exactly where she had before, 50 yards, trees shivering behind her, face pale. "Hey," Sam shouted, his voice raw against the storm. "Do you need help?" The rain devoured his words, shredding them into tatters. But across the clearing, the woman did not stir. Sam's pulse thudded. He swallowed, tried again. "You all right?" Nothing. She might as well have been carved from the storm itself. He retreated into the cabin, slamming the door behind him. His breath came sharp, ragged. He pressed his back against the wood, water dripping from his hair, his shirt clinging to his chest. His mind scrambled. If she was real, she would have reacted. No one ignored shouts like that, not in this weather, not in the middle of nowhere, unless she couldn't hear him, unless she wasn't meant to. Sam dragged the curtains closed, shutting out the sight. The cabin plunged into dim glow, its lamplight warmer, now that the forest was hidden. He exhaled, forcing his shoulders to drop, trying to reclaim control. Out of sight, out of mind. But the silence was worse. Behind the thin fabric of the curtains, he could still feel her, her gaze pressing through, heavier than the storm. The house seemed smaller, as though her presence outside had thickened the air within. Sam sank back into his chair, pulled his notebook close, and forced himself to write. Birds, weather, the mating habits of foxes, anything. His pen scratched across damp pages, letters blurring, but his focus splintered. Each stroke felt artificial, hollow. Minutes dragged. The storm thundered. Finally, against his better judgment, he rose and peeled the curtain back an inch. She was closer, not by much, maybe 10 feet nearer, but enough that he knew. He stared, throat tight. Her posture was unchanged, her face tilted fractionally upward now, eyes fixed unblinking on the window. Sam dropped the curtain and stumbled back, nearly knocking over the lamp. His chest heaved, his skin clammy. "No," he whispered. "No, I misjudged the distance. That's all." But the lie didn't hold. He knew the trees, the clearing, every yard of space. She had moved, not while he watched, but in the moments he dared to look away. He tried closing his eyes, counting breaths, willing sleep to drag him down. But each time he opened them, the thought returned. She was out there, closer now, waiting. By midnight, he gave in and looked again. She stood at the very edge of the clearing, barely 20 yards away, rain running in rivulets down her face. Her eyes caught the lamplight like beads of glass. Sam's knees buckled. He gripped the windowsill with white knuckles, whispering, "What do you want from me?" No answer. Just the storm, just her stare. By the time the clock's hands crawled past 1 in the morning, Sam's nerves were raw. The storm had eased into steady rain, softer but more relentless, a rhythm that seemed designed to wear him down. The cabin air was damp, clinging to his skin, his blanket soaked at the hem where he had tracked water earlier. He hadn't moved from the window in nearly an hour. The curtain hung slack to the side, forgotten. His eyes burned, refusing to blink, though tears gathered at the corners. The woman still stood at the edge of the clearing, 20 yards, no more, her body angled perfectly toward the cabin, her face blurred by distance and water, but her eyes unmistakable, fixed, unyielding, glinting faintly each time the lamp flared. Sam's mind clawed at explanation. Sleep deprivation, hallucination. The human brain finds patterns in randomness. But each time he tried to rationalize, he caught himself counting. The trees behind her, the dark ridges of bark, the spacing of branches. And each time, the Count confirmed what his instincts screamed. She was closer, not by sight, by certainty. He pressed his palm flat against the glass, the chill soaking through his skin. His breath fogged the pain, blurring her form, but when he wiped it clear, she was still there, still watching. Minutes bled. His hand cramped from holding the sill. He forced himself back, stumbling toward the desk, collapsing into the chair. His notes lay open, words smudged into gray stains. He tried to write, but his pen skidded, scratching nonsense loops. His handwriting looked alien, disconnected from thought. The lamp buzzed faintly. Its glow cast long shadows across the walls, stretching toward the corners where the light could not reach. Sam's ears rang with silence between raindrops, with the hum of electricity, with the echo of his own shallow breath. He told himself, "Don't look again. Don't give her the satisfaction." But the compulsion was unbearable. At 1:47, he turned his head. She stood halfway across the clearing. 10 yards. His body lurched as though struck. His chest seized, air trapped in his lungs. The sight was worse than he imagined, not because of how close she was, but because of the impossibility. She had moved without moving. No stride, no sway, no break in posture. Simply there, nearer, as if distance itself had folded. Her features emerged clearer in the lamplight. Cheekbones pale, lips drawn tight, water streaming from her chin. Her eyes were too dark, pupils swallowing iris, and yet their reflection burned like coal. Sam stumbled backward, knocking the chair over. The crash rang loud in the small room. He clutched at the rug, his voice cracking into the silence. "Stay away." But the forest absorbed his cry, swallowed whole. He pressed himself against the far wall, sliding down until he sat on the floor, knees pulled to his chest. His breath tore ragged, shallow, as though the cabin itself had shrunk around him. The window loomed. Her eyes never wavered. Sam clenched his fists, nails biting into his palms. His thoughts raced. If I close my eyes, she'll move again. If I sleep, she'll be here. If I turn away, she'll be inside. Time collapsed. 5 minutes 30. Maybe an hour, he could not tell. His vision blurred, his mind drifting. But every time his eyelids sagged, panic jolted him awake. At 2:30, he dared a glance. She stood at the tree line, no longer in the clearing, right outside the window. Her face filled the pain. Sam screamed, scrambling backward, knocking into the desk. Papers scattered. The lamp swayed violently, casting wild arcs of shadow. His heart hammered so loud he thought it would rupture. But she did not move, pressed against the glass, her eyes unblinking, her lips slightly parted. Rain streaked down her cheeks, dripping into the sill. Her breath should have fogged the window, but none appeared. Sam clutched the desk edge, sobbing, shaking his head. No, 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 no. The lamp sputtered, buzzed, then steadied. In its light, her features sharpened further, skin pale as bone, eyes so wide they seemed to split her face. And then she lifted one hand, slow, deliberate, fingers spread, pressing against the glass. Sam's breath caught. His own hand rose involuntarily, trembling, mirroring hers an inch from the pain. Cold radiated through, a chill so deep it numbed his fingertips. He jerked back, clutching his wrist. His body shook uncontrollably. The hand on the glass slid down slowly, leaving no smear, no print, only the suggestion of weight. Sam collapsed to the floor, curling tight, whispering to himself. Fragments of prayers, mantras, anything to drown the silence. His body begged for sleep, but terror held him awake, a puppet on frayed strings. When dawn finally cracked pale across the horizon, he dared to look again. The clearing was empty, but the glass was damp, as though someone had pressed their face to it in the night. Sam had always thought of the forest as a place of refuge. The canopy, the layered scents of moss and pine, the secret lives of animals unfolding just beyond sight, it was where he felt most alive, most rational. But after that night, the forest became a cage. When dawn seeped into the clearing, gray and thin, he convinced himself he had survived something transient, a hallucination of exhaustion, a nightmare clinging to waking hours. Yet the damp mark on the glass said otherwise. He stared at it for long minutes. No handprint, no clear impression, just a sheen of moisture, as though breath had clung where breath should not be. By mid-morning, he packed. The decision was abrupt, almost desperate. He shoved notebooks, pens, food rations into his rucksack with shaking hands. Every sound seemed louder in the small cabin, the scrape of the zipper, the thump of boots on floorboards, the hollow clang of the kettle as he tossed it aside. His rational mind whispered protests. "Don't leave. It's safer here. This is shelter." But another voice, older and sharper, drowned it out. "You cannot stay where the eyes have found you." He bolted the door behind him, though he knew it would do no good, and stepped into the forest. The rain had dwindled to a mist, hanging low between trunks, beating on his jacket. The forest smelled rich, metallic and earthy, the aftermath of a storm. Birds had not returned yet. The silence pressed close. Sam kept his eyes forward. He did not look toward the clearing. He did not dare. His boots squelched in mud, each step slow, deliberate. The pack tugged at his shoulders, heavier than it should have been. His breath misted pale in the morning chill. At first the woods looked ordinary. Fallen branches, mushrooms swelling at roots, the scar of a deer trail winding east. But as minutes passed, the certainty grew in him again. He was being watched. It prickled the back of his neck, a steady pressure, as though eyes traced the rhythm of his steps. He forced himself not to glance back. Half a mile in, he failed. He turned sharply, binoculars trembling in his hands. Through the mist, 50 yards behind, between two pines she stood, closer than she should have been, given the distance he had covered. Closer in posture, in presence, though still impossibly still. Sam's chest heaved. His grip slipped on the binoculars. He lowered them quickly, stumbling forward, muttering, "No, no, just walk, just walk." He kept moving. Branches snapped underfoot, brambles tore at his pants. Each step felt heavier, as though the forest thickened against him. Every few minutes he glanced back, and every time, she was there, sometimes behind one trunk, sometimes another, always at the same impossible distance. Rain dripped from her hair, her arms hung limp, her face never breaking its stare. By noon, Sam's legs shook with exhaustion. His rucksack bit cruelly into his shoulders. He collapsed against a fallen log, chest burning, hands trembling. The forest closed around him. Mist curled like smoke. He pulled the binoculars again. Compelled, despite the terror, she stood 30 yards away. Not behind him now. Ahead. Sam's breath ripped through him. He dropped the glasses, stumbled to his feet. The forest spun. He turned east, off trail, forcing his way through thickets, branches clawing his face, mud sucking at his boots. He didn't care where, as long as it was away. But the eyes followed, always at the edge of sight. A pale face through branches, dark eyes fixed. He began to hear her, or thought he did, the faint shift of fabric against bark, the drag of weight through wet leaves. Never a full sound, never a stride, but fragments, enough to let him know she was not standing anymore. She was walking. By dusk, Sam's mind frayed. His notes, his rational frameworks, all scattered like leaves. Only instinct remained. Move, move, don't stop. But when he tripped, sprawling into the mud, and lifted his head, she was crouched 10 feet away, no longer distant, no longer at the tree line. Her face tilted, water dripping from her chin, her eyes black and endless, her lips parted slightly as though to speak, but no sound came. Sam screamed, scrambling backward, boots slipping. He rose, bolted into the thickening dark branches, whipping his face. His heart pounded so violently he thought it would tear free. Behind him, silence, and that was worse than footsteps, because silence meant she didn't need to chase. She was already where he was going. Darkness fell without warning, as though the storm itself had stolen the Sunday. The forest dimmed to shadow upon shadow, trees rising like black ribs, mist curling thicker between them. Sam stumbled, legs heavy as stone, lungs scraping with every breath. His rucksack had torn somewhere along the way. His notebooks lay abandoned, pages dissolving in wet leaves. None of it mattered now, only forward. But forward led nowhere. Each path he carved through bramble and mud bent back into the same hollow. Each turn brought him face to face with the same skeletal tree, the same gnarled roots. The forest had folded on itself, a maze designed to wear him thin, and always the eyes. He felt them more than saw them now, pressed against his skin, sliding along his spine, burrowing between his thoughts. Sometimes he caught the flicker of pale skin between trunks, sometimes the sheen of water dripping from hair, but more often it was absence and outline where no outline should be, darkness too dense for dusk. By midnight, Sam collapsed against a boulder, chest convulsing, vision swimming. His hands shook as he pressed them into the moss. Feeling its damp sponginess ground him in something real. He whispered, voice cracked raw. Why me? What do you want? The forest gave no answer, but the silence changed. It was no longer the silence of rain, of mist, of animals hidden in burrows. It was deliberate, shaped, as though the entire wood held its breath. And then came the sound. Not footsteps, not branches breaking. Breath, behind him. Cold, damp, impossibly close, misting against the back of his neck. Sam froze, his body locked, muscles rigid with terror. He dared not move, dared not breathe. As the chill pressed deeper, each exhale not his own. His mind screamed, don't turn, don't turn. But he had to. Slowly trembling, he twisted his head. She knelt inches away. Her face hovered in the dark, pale skin slick with rain, eyes black and wide enough to swallow him whole. Water dripped from her hair onto his shoulder, each drop colder than ice. Her lips parted, and for the first time, sound emerged. A whisper dry as leaves. Hutha. Sam recoiled, scrambling, but her hand shot out, pressing flat against his chest. Cold radiated through him, deep into bone, halting his breath. He clawed at her wrist, but his strength faltered as though his lungs had forgotten how to expand. Her stare pierced him, a tunnel narrowing until nothing existed but those eyes. And then she leaned closer, her mouth hovering by his ear, whispering again. Hutha, Lakwatoy. The world collapsed into black. When Sam woke, dawn smeared pale across the canopy. His body ached, his clothes soaked, but his chest rose and fell ragged, shallow, alive. He staggered upright, disoriented, his mind raw with fragments of memory. The forest looked ordinary. Birds chirped faintly. Squirrels rustled through wet leaves. No figure stood among the trees. But when Sam touched his chest, the skin burned cold, the echo of her hand lingering deep beneath. And when he exhaled, the mist did not fade. It clung, curling from his lips long after the air should have cleared, as though his breath no longer belonged entirely to him. He stumbled toward the dirt road, half convinced he'd escaped, but the feeling followed, eyes tracing his every step, breath colder than the morning, because the stair was no longer bound to the forest. It was inside him now. Story 7. The subterranean tenant. The house smelled of water that had nowhere left to go. Jordan noticed it the moment the landlord handed him the keys, a sour dampness that clung to the baseboards, threaded through the carpet, and lingered in the closets. The old man laughed it off, muttering something about pipes that groaned in the winter and walls that soaked up summer rain. Cheap rent excused the smell, he said. Besides, he added, no one uses the basement anymore. Jordan hadn't seen a basement. The house was a narrow 2-bedroom, sagging at the seams, with wallpaper curling like old scabs and floorboards that flexed under weight. It came furnished with relics from tenants past, a crooked lamp, a sofa that smelled faintly of smoke, a dresser scarred with cigarette burns. Jordan told himself he could live with it. Anything was better than his cramped apartment by the freeway. But the smell lingered. It rose from beneath the floor, metallic and sour, a dampness that never quite dried. At night it grew stronger, seeping into his sheets, following him into dreams. 3 days after moving in, while unpacking shirts into the hall closet, Jordan found the door. It wasn't obvious at first. Behind coats and a box of hangers, a panel of wood stood recessed into the wall. A handle of tarnished brass protruded, scratched and dull. He tugged, but it didn't budge. A padlock, small and rusted, hung at its base. He crouched, peering at it. The wood around the frame was darker, swollen from damp. Beneath the faint groan of pipes, he thought he heard something else. A soft shuffling, a cough muffled by walls. The sound was gone almost before he noticed it. Jordan straightened quickly, heart hammering. He told himself it was just water in the pipes, the settling of old beams. He shoved the coats back in place, closed the closet door, and tried to forget it. But the house did not let him forget. That night, the noise returned. At first it was faint, woven into the creak of floorboards and hum of the fridge. A drag, like cloth over wood, followed by a brief, rasping exhale. Jordan froze in bed, the sheets sticking to his damp skin. He held his breath, ears straining. There, again. A shuffle, a cough, too deliberate to be plumbing. He sat upright, fumbling for the lamp, its weak light casting shallow shadows. The bedroom was still. The hall stretched quiet. But beneath him, faint through the boards, the sound continued. A tenant, he thought suddenly. Someone still living below. The notion lodged in his mind, irrational yet irresistible. Maybe the landlord had lied. Maybe someone had never left. He rose, padded barefoot into the hall, and stopped before the closet. The coats hung silent. The brass handle glinted faintly in the low light. The cough came again. From behind it, Jordan's hand hovered over the padlock, fingers trembling. He almost pulled, almost forced, but dread surged, stronger than curiosity. He stepped back, closed the closet door, and whispered to himself, "It's nothing, just the pipes." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. The house was not empty, and whatever lived beneath the floorboards was waiting. Morning did little to ease the dread. The pale light that spilled through the blinds only emphasized how gray the house was, how its walls seemed stained with something time alone couldn't scrub away. Jordan shuffled into the kitchen, brewed coffee that tasted like rust from the old pot, and told himself it had been nothing more than fatigue, a trick of nerves. But when he passed the hall closet, the thought returned sharp, undeniable. The cough had been real. He paused, mug in hand, listening. The house groaned with pipes and settling wood, the normal chorus of old structures. But beneath it, he swore he caught the faint scrape of something shifting below. He backed away quickly. By noon, he had decided to call the landlord. He told himself it was practical, nothing more. If someone was down there squatting, hiding it was the old man's problem to solve. The phone rang 6 times before the landlord picked up. His voice was gravelly, worn, as though every word had to be dragged through years of dust. "Hello? It's Jordan," he said, trying to keep steady. "Listen, there's a door in the hall closet. Locked. Where does it go?" A pause. Too long. Then, "Just pipes. Storage from when the house was built. Nothing you need." Jordan swallowed. "I heard noises last night. From underneath. Coughing." The landlord chuckled, dry and humorless. "Old houses make old sounds. Don't lose sleep over it." But the padlock. Best to leave it," the old man interrupted, his tone flattening. "Not everything in an old house is worth poking at. You'll get used to it." The line clicked dead before Jordan could answer. He sat staring at the receiver, unease crawling through him. The old man hadn't denied the noises. He'd simply refused to explain. That night, Jordan left the hall light burning and lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Hours crept past. Midnight arrived, and with it, the sounds. Faint at first, a shuffle, a scrape, then clearer like the drag of a chair across a rough floor. His breath hitched. He pressed the pillow over his head, but the noises seeped through. He swore he heard breathing, heavy and damp, drawn slow as if through lungs full of water. Finally, he snapped. He rose, grabbed the flashlight from his dresser, and crept into the hall. The closet loomed. He opened the door, coats brushing against him like reluctant hands. The padlock glinted in the beam. His heart thundered as he pressed his ear to the wood. Silence. He held his breath, counted, then 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. From the other side, Jordan stumbled back, flashlight beam jerking wild across the coats. His chest seized, his throat too tight to scream. The closet hung open, still and ordinary. But he could not mistake what he'd heard. Someone was down there, and they knew he was listening. Jordan did not sleep after the knocks. He sat rigid on the couch until dawn, the flashlight still clutched in his damp hand. The beam long since faded to nothing. His body ached with exhaustion, but his mind would not let go of the sound, the deliberate rhythm, the certainty that there had been intent behind it. Something below had answered his listening. Something had called back. By morning, the house felt different. Not safer, not quieter, but heavier, as though the air itself had grown saturated with presence. Each step across the creaking boards sent vibrations down into the unseen, and Jordan found himself imagining that whatever lay below could feel him moving, that his footfalls were messages, betrayals of where he stood. He drank coffee without tasting it, hands trembling against the chipped mug, and avoided the hall closet as though its door had grown teeth. But avoidance could not last. Every time he passed, his eyes snagged on the padlock, on the dark outline of the hidden door. Every time he tried to distract himself with television or unpacking boxes, his mind returned to the cough, the scrape, the knocks. The landlord's voice echoed too, dismissive and final. Best to leave it. Which meant, Jordan realized with a chill, that the old man knew there was something worth leaving. By afternoon, he was in his car, driving to the hardware store. He told himself it was for peace of mind, nothing more, that he would look, confirm there was nothing, and close it forever. He bought a pry bar, a heavier flashlight, spare batteries, and work gloves. The cashier did not comment, but Jordan imagined the suspicion in her eyes as she rang up the padlock cutters. He carried the bag to his car as though it were contraband. Back home, the house seemed to expect him. The smell of damp had thickened in the hall, sharp as rust, and when he opened the closet to stash the tools, the coats hung limper, as though sagging from some hidden weight. He shoved the bag onto the floor and slammed the door, sweat prickling his neck. All day he tried to resist. He told himself he would wait, that he would call the landlord again, that he would leave the mystery buried. But night came anyway, slow and certain, and with it the sounds returned. At first only shuffling, irregular and faint, but then the cough again, wet and low, rising through the boards until Jordan could feel it resonate in his ribs. He pressed his palms against his ears, curled on the couch, whispering to himself that he was imagining it. And then, just as before, 3 knocks sounded, deliberate and steady. He rose without thinking. The flashlight beam shook across the hall as he opened the closet. The coat swayed faintly, though the air was still. The padlock glinted. His breath roared in his ears, his pulse racing so hard his vision blurred. He crouched, drew the cutters from the bag, and set them against the lock. The metal resisted at first, groaning under pressure, but with a sharp crack, it gave way, the pieces clattering to the closet floor. The sound was deafening in the quiet. Jordan froze, waiting, half expecting the door to burst inward, but nothing happened. The wood stood silent, patient. He swallowed hard, gripped the brass handle, and pulled. The door groaned open, hinges stiff with rust. A breath of air rose from below, damp, cold, tinged with earth and something metallic, like pennies in stagnant water. The smell filled his nose, clinging to the back of his throat. The beam of his flashlight cut down into darkness. Steps descended narrow planks, warped and darkened, vanishing into shadow. The light revealed only part of the descent before it was swallowed whole. Jordan stood there, chest heaving, the open mouth of the stairwell yawning before him. He thought of calling the police, but what would he say? That his landlord kept the basement locked? That he had heard a cough? They would laugh. Or worse, they would come and find nothing. And then he would be left alone again, with proof of his fear erased. The silence below was deeper than silence. It was a listening. He took the first step. The wood groaned beneath his weight, vibrations humming up through his legs. He angled the flashlight down, its beam jittering across damp stone walls. The smell thickened, earthy and metallic, laced with something sour, like breath trapped too long in a closed space. Another step, then another. The darkness pressed closer, swallowing the narrow cone of light, making him feel as though the beam revealed less than it concealed. He gripped the railing, if it could be called that, just a strip of wood nailed unevenly to the wall, and continued down. Halfway, he paused, certain he had heard movement below. A scrape, soft but deliberate, like something shifting its weight. His mouth went dry, his tongue heavy. He raised the flashlight higher, but the light dissolved in black. "Hello?" His voice cracked. It bounced strangely, muffled and warped, as though the walls themselves swallowed it whole. No reply. He forced himself down the final steps, boots landing on damp earth. The floor was not finished but packed soil, uneven and soft. His beam caught the glint of pipes overhead, sweating condensation, dripping faintly. Shadows pooled in every corner. The space was larger than he expected, wider than the house above, stretching beyond the edges of the foundation. The air was heavy, pressing against his chest. And then he saw it. In the far wall, half hidden by shadow, a chair. Wooden, old, its legs sunk slightly into the soil. It was pulled away from the wall, angled as though someone had just risen from it. Jordan's throat tightened. His light trembled as he swept the beam around, searching for movement, for proof. He caught the edge of a tin cup, a folded blanket, a scuffed shoe, signs of habitation. Someone had been living here. He backed toward the stairs, breath ragged, every instinct screaming retreat. But before he could turn, a cough echoed from the shadows, wet, rasping, close, closer than the chair. Jordan's knees buckled. The flashlight shook violently in his grip. He swung it toward the sound. The beam caught only earth, wall, pipes. Then the light flickered, and something shifted in the corner, just beyond its reach. The cough hung in the dark long after it had ended, an echo that didn't quite fade the way natural sound should. Jordan's flashlight beam jittered across damp stone, trembling with his unsteady hand, catching only fragments of the underground chamber pipes, slick with condensation, patches of earth darker than the rest, as though soaked through. The chair sat abandoned in the far corner, its wood swollen with damp. Beside it, the folded blanket, the tin cup, the scuffed shoe, all proof that someone had lived here, or still lived here. But the air pressed against Jordan with an insistence that felt less like the residue of habitation and more like the weight of a presence watching. He whispered into the dark, his throat raw. "Who's there?" His voice didn't carry right. It sank, muffled, swallowed by the soil walls as though the underground itself preferred silence. For a moment he thought he had imagined the cough entirely, but then came the sound. Not a reply. A step. Wet. Deliberate. Dragging. Jordan's stomach dropped. He swung the flashlight wildly toward the corner, its beam slicing through dust and mist. The light caught only the far wall, cracked stone and damp earth. But he had heard it clearly, the shift of weight, the squelch of moisture pressed into soil. His skin prickled, sweat cold against his spine. He forced the words out again, harsher this time. "This is my house. You can't be here." Silence. Then another step, this one closer, a faint suction, as though bare feet pressed into mud. Jordan stumbled backward until his shoulder struck the wall. The flashlight quivered in his grip, its circle shrinking and expanding with every tremor of his hand. He aimed lower, sweeping across the uneven ground, searching for the shape that made the noise. And there, for an instant, he saw it. Not a body, not whole. Just the impression of weight pressing into the earth. A shallow footprint dark with moisture, forming even as he watched. His breath tore sharp from his chest. He staggered toward the stairs, eyes locked on the mark in the soil. Another appeared, inches closer, then another. Something was walking toward him, invisible except for the prints it left behind. He turned, bolting for the steps, his boots hammering the wood. But halfway up he froze, light bouncing against the low ceiling. Because from above, he heard it, the creak of floorboards, the scrape of a chair, the unmistakable sound of someone moving around in the house above. Jordan's chest clenched. He had left the door open. Panic surged hot through his veins. If he went up, he would meet whatever had left the basement. But if he stayed, the prince would reach him in the dark. He stood trembling on the steps, caught between two dangers, the air thick with the damp stench of breath that was not his own. Then the coughing started again, this time not a single voice, but many, wet, ragged, overlapping, filling the chamber until the soil walls seemed to vibrate with it. Jordan clamped his hands over his ears, dropping the flashlight. The beam spun across the dirt, catching fragments, the chair, the cup, the blanket, and then landed on the wall. Not stone, not earth, faces, pressed into the surface, faint and shifting, as though the soil had remembered those who once touched it. Eyes half open, mouth slack, each one twitching faintly as though gasping for breath. Jordan screamed, stumbling upward, hands scrabbling at the railing. He burst back into the hall closet, slamming the door shut behind him, chest heaving. The coats brushed against his face, damp and suffocating. He shoved them aside, spilling into the hallway. The house stood silent, but he knew. The tenant in the subterranean dark was no squatter, no hidden vagrant. It was older, patient, and it had been there long before the house was built. Now, it knew him, and now, it was moving freely above. Jordan spent the first minutes after slamming the closet door with his back pressed against it, palms flat, waiting for the inevitable push from the other side. His breath tore in ragged bursts, each exhale thick with the damp stench he had carried up from the earth. The coats hung limp against his shoulder, brushing his face like fingers. He half expected them to tighten, to pull him back through, but nothing came. The silence that followed was worse than the coughing, worse than the sound of bare feet dragging through soil. It was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of something that had already moved on. Jordan staggered into the hallway, nearly tripping over the flashlight he had dropped earlier. Its beam still sputtered weakly, casting long arcs across the warped floorboards. He picked it up, hands trembling so badly the light swung wild across the walls, painting the wallpaper in twitching fragments. The house looked unchanged. The crooked lamp in the living room still stood. The sofa sagged in its same dent. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, but Jordan knew with a certainty that gnawed through him. He was no longer alone in the rooms above. He stumbled to the couch and collapsed, dragging the blanket over his shoulders. He told himself he would wait for daylight, that daylight would make sense of things, but the hours stretched slow, each minute punctuated by the creak of boards, the faint sigh of walls, sounds that were no longer benign. At some point, exhaustion took him. When he woke, gray dawn seeped through the curtains, painting the room in diluted light. His mouth was dry, his head heavy, but for a moment he almost believed it had been dream. Almost, until he saw the footprints. Dark, wet marks stretched from the closet across the hall, up the stairs, and back down again, smeared into arcs that ended near his couch. The wood was still damp where the prints had pressed, as though they had been made minutes earlier. Jordan's stomach turned. He followed them with his eyes, his body refusing to rise, tracing the path like a confession written across the floor. And then he saw it, at the very edge of the rug, a key. Shiny, new, its metal still smeared with mud, the grooves sharp as though freshly cut. It lay exactly where his bare feet should have been, as if placed there with intention. Jordan leaned forward, reaching hesitantly. The key was cold, colder than metal should be. His hand recoiled as though burned. He stared at it, pulse hammering. His mind spun with questions he could not form into words. How had it appeared? Who had brought it? And most terrifying of all, what did it unlock? That night, he locked every door, every window, double-checked the bolts until his fingers were raw. The key lay untouched on the table, a silent weight he could not bring himself to throw away. He tried to sleep, but the house would not let him. Hours passed in restless turning, sheets twisted tight around his legs. Each time he closed his eyes, he felt the press of cold fingers on his chest, the weight of a gaze he could not see. And then, sometime past 3, he heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy with damp. They dragged across the upstairs floorboards, pacing the length of the hall. Jordan froze, body rigid beneath the blanket. He counted them, each step measured. 1, 2, 3, then silence, until the next sound. Knocking, not from the closet, not from the basement, from the hall outside his bedroom. 3 knocks, slow, certain. Jordan's breath locked in his chest. He clutched the blanket tighter, praying it would stop. But it came again, closer, insistent. He sat trembling, staring at the door, its thin wood glowing faintly in the lamplight. He could almost see the shadow of a hand pressing against it from the other side. And then the voice came, hoarse, low, rasping through the crack between door and frame. "You have my key." Jordan clapped his hands over his ears, rocking against the headboard, whispering, "No, no, no." But the knocking did not stop. Each rap rattled through his chest, syncing with his heartbeat until he could no longer tell which was which. The key still lay on the table, and the tenant, long buried, long locked away, had found its way out. And so the story's close, at least for tonight. 7 doors opened, 7 silences broken, 7 warnings whispered across the static. Perhaps you'll forget them by morning. Perhaps they'll blur into dreams, the kind that dissolve with the first light. Or perhaps they'll linger an image at the edge of your vision, a sound too faint to explain, a presence you swear you left behind but never quite did. Either way, the night is not done with you. Until we meet again, keep your doors closed, your lights steady, and your ears open, because somewhere out there, maybe closer than you think, someone is still telling their story. Good night, and sleep carefully.